Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So, before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. My name is Plaza, and what I'm about to share is a very real part of my life. I was born in Ashton-under-Lyne, in Lancashire, England, back in 1968. That makes me 54 now. My parents split up when I was 7, and that's when everything in my life started to change. But that's not really the point of this story. What matters is where my parents lived and where my dad still lives today. At 81 years old, he's still in the same house they bought back in 1967. One of my earliest memories is of screaming in my bedroom. I shared it with my brother, who's 2 years younger than me. I was about 3 or 4 years old. I saw something standing next to my toys or my clothes. I can't remember exactly what it was. But I remember it scared me so much that I screamed, and my dad came running upstairs. He tried to calm me down, telling me it was just the light from the TV. But that didn't make sense, because there were no TVs in bedrooms back then. It was just a TV in the living room, so I know he was just trying to explain it away. What I didn't know at the time was that this wasn't the first time I had screamed like that. My mom later told me that I would cry and fight bedtime every night. I was terrified of going to bed, and it was always the same. Every night, I would scream while my mom carried me upstairs. When my brother was born, things seemed to settle down a bit. I didn't kick up as much of a fuss, and every morning, I'd be found in my brother's crib. We had a small, 2-bedroom stone house, and there was a bathroom that had been converted into a loft. I remember, when I was about 5 or 6, I'd take baths by myself. And every time, I would feel like someone was watching me. I didn't know what it was, I didn't know about ghosts or anything like that, but that feeling always freaked me out. There was one night when I woke up and felt something sitting on my legs. I couldn't move, and I screamed in panic. But the moment the light came on, the pressure on my legs disappeared. I was around 5 at the time, and again, I woke up to find myself in my brother's crib or vice versa. We eventually moved when I was 7. Mom had started seeing a new man, and one night, when Dad was at work, she woke me and my brother up to move us into this guy's flat. I didn't understand it at the time, but I later realized Mom was having an affair. I used to be happy sitting on the balcony of that flat, collecting bus tickets, not knowing what was really going on inside. Dad and Mom worked out a schedule where we spent every other weekend with Dad. I remember going to visit him on Saturdays, and we'd spend the night at his place. By then, Dad had started drinking more. Maybe he had always been a drinker, I'm not sure, but it meant we spent a lot of time at pubs with him. He'd play cards, and my brother and I would be content with a Coke and some chips. Over time, we started spending more time at home, while Dad was out at the pub. I was still terrified at night, though, and my brother and I would sleep in Dad's bed, with him falling asleep on the sofa. I think I was around 9 or 10 when something happened that I'll never forget. It was just like any other weekend. Dad hadn't come home yet, but we knew he wouldn't be long. My brother and I were upstairs on Dad's bed, talking and getting excited. Dad had promised that the next time we stayed with him, we'd go to Blackpool. For anyone who doesn't know, Blackpool is a seaside town about 55 miles away from where we lived, and we always got really excited when Dad took us there. We'd talk about all the things we wanted to do. I was lying on Dad's bed, with my head on the pillow, and my brother was looking at me as we talked. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp tug on my hair from behind. My brother saw it happen, too. My head jerked back with the force of it. We both screamed in terror. I know for sure I wasn't moving, my head was on the pillow, and there was no way it could have gotten caught in anything. We were both too scared to stay in Dad's bed after that. I don't remember what happened next, but I'm pretty sure we stayed downstairs until Dad came home. And I don't remember what excuse he gave for what happened to my hair, but one thing's for sure, we never slept in his bed again. I'm not sure how much time passed between the hair-pulling incident and what happened next, but the story is the same. It was late, and Dad was at the pub. My brother and I had gone upstairs to bed. By this time, we were staying in the back bedroom, still sharing the same bed. I must have been around 11 or 12 years old, but after everything that had happened before, I couldn't imagine sleeping alone. My brother felt the same way, so neither of us minded sharing the bed. That night, though, nothing seemed unusual. Yes, we both felt uneasy, but that was just part of every weekend. We had gotten used to the strange things happening, and it had been months, maybe even years, since the last odd experience. We didn't go to bed scared that night. If something had happened, we wouldn't have gone upstairs at all. We were lying there, talking, when we heard footsteps climbing the stairs. That was strange. We hadn't heard the front door open, which usually caused the kitchen door to blow open. But we clearly heard footsteps, one after another, slowly coming up the stairs. My heart raced, and in that moment, everything from the past rushed back. I'm sure the whole thing only lasted a few seconds, but those few seconds felt like an eternity. The sound of the steps was distinct. It wasn't the neighbor, it was coming from our stairs. Step by step, those footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were almost at the top. We both knew instantly it wasn't Dad. And just before the footsteps reached the final step, we heard the front door open, and the kitchen door blew open, just like it always did when Dad came home. At that exact moment, the footsteps stopped. We screamed for Dad to come upstairs, and when he did, we told him what we'd heard. He tried to brush it off, saying it was just the neighbors. I know he was just trying to calm us down, but I'm almost 100% sure that what we heard wasn't from next door. If it had been, why didn't we hear anything from them after Dad came home? It wasn't in our heads. After that, things went back to normal. Mom eventually split up with her new partner, and we moved back to the same town where we had lived before. That meant no more weekends at Dad's house. We could visit him anytime, but I didn't need to stay there again. It felt like a relief at the time, but looking back, I wish I had known what was coming next. Mom didn't waste any time finding another man, and by the time I was 16, I decided to leave and move in with my cousin at my aunt's house. Things hadn't ended well between me and Mom. She wanted me to contribute to the household expenses, asking for the same amount she'd lost when I left school. The problem was, I was only getting £25 a week from my youth training scheme, YTS, and I was training to drive everything from forklifts to buses. It was a dream job, but it was 8 miles away, and I needed 4 buses just to get there. The cost of the bus pass was £4 or £5 a week, which I couldn't afford. Mom didn't see it that way. She wanted her £23.50, and when I couldn't pay it, and when things got tense with her new partner, I decided I'd had enough. I packed my things and moved out. Losing the YTS job because I couldn't afford the bus fare was hard. I missed out on a huge opportunity. But it was a turning point, and eventually, I forgave Mom for that. The chance was gone, but a new chapter had begun. I was closer to my cousin now. We'd always been close when I moved back to the area, and we spent countless nights playing games like Asteroids or Football Manager on the ZX Spectrum. We'd stay up all night, walking the streets in the summer at all hours. Strangely, my cousin was terrified of ghosts. To this day, I'm not sure why, since he had never seen anything himself. For about 2 years, everything seemed okay. I was working at a paper mill, a job my grandma had helped me get. It started as a YTS, but after a year, they took us all on full-time, and I was earning good money for an 18-year-old. But then, the mill moved to Ireland, and I was made redundant. I wasn't too stressed about it. I didn't drink, smoke, or do drugs. I was more interested in girls now, and I had started seeing someone. But it was still early days. And even though I had a girlfriend, I still spent a lot of time hanging out with my cousin, playing Football Manager. That evening, I was lying in bed at my aunt's house, trying to sleep, but something wasn't right. I was on the top bunk, wedged between 2 bedrooms. For some reason, I couldn't get comfortable. Suddenly, I heard a strange rocking noise. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was unmistakable, like the creak of something moving. Everyone else was asleep, so no one should have been up. The noise made me freeze, my body covered in goosebumps. It was just like when I was younger, back at my dad's house, and I would feel that same rush of fear. The rocking sound was coming from somewhere very close. I lay there for what felt like ages, not moving, too scared to even breathe. After what seemed like 5 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what was going on. Slowly, I lifted myself up and turned my head in the direction of the noise. And that's when I saw it. There, at the top of the stairs, was a pram, one that had once been used for babies, now sitting still. But the weird thing was, it was rocking. It wasn't just still, it was gently moving back and forth, as if someone was pushing it, like a mother rocking a baby to sleep. I knew no one was near it. I was certain of that. I was completely alone in the house. Seeing that pram move on its own, hearing it rock, was enough to send a cold wave of fear through me. I couldn't handle it. I don't even remember if I stayed until the next morning or left that night, but I know one thing, I never slept in that house again. I was terrified. With nowhere else to go, I had to make a decision. I couldn't stay at my aunt's, and my mom was out of the question. My brother was living in another town. So, reluctantly, I moved back into my dad's house. But I had a plan this time. Dad worked nights, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and sometimes even weekends. I figured I could manage as long as I kept the lights on and the radio going. That way, I wouldn't hear anything. I knew the house still had that strange, unsettling feeling, but I thought if I could sleep through it, I'd be okay. The idea was to stay downstairs, watch TV until I was exhausted, and then go to bed, knowing I would fall asleep immediately. This worked for a while, until one Saturday night, when Dad was working overtime. I had just spent a nice evening with my girlfriend, and felt good. So, like usual, I stayed up late watching TV. It was a horror movie, something I normally wouldn't watch, because I'd always been too scared of ghosts. But I was tired and just trying to stay busy. The movie was too much, though, and I switched the channel. Back then, there were only 4 or 5 channels to choose from, so I quickly found something else, and before I knew it, I had dozed off on the sofa. I woke up later, and instantly realized something was off. The TV screen was different, it was no longer the show I had switched to, but a horror film. I reached for the remote, confused. I remembered putting the remote on the floor before I fell asleep. I turned it over, trying to change the channel again, but something didn't sit right. The remote was on the floor, and somehow the TV had gone back to that same horror film I had switched off earlier. I couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense. Could I have changed the channel in my sleep? Was it possible someone else had come in and switched it? But it was 2 a.m. in a quiet town, and who else would be messing with the TV? It didn't add up, but I couldn't figure out what happened. Eventually, life went on. I got my girlfriend pregnant, and her parents kicked her out, so she came to live with me at my dad's house. I can't recall anything strange happening during that time. But soon after, we were given a house of our own. I moved in with my new girlfriend, who turned out to be my first love, despite being my second partner. She too became pregnant soon after, and we lived together for a while. But there was no more ghostly activity. Life kept moving forward. I worked away during the week, and while I was gone, my partner found comfort with a group of friends. Eventually, she told me she wanted to do things she couldn't do while we were together. It broke my heart, and we separated after that. Looking back, I know it hurt more than I ever expected. I still regret leaving my first girlfriend. But that's how things turned out. After some time, Mom and I patched things up. She invited me to stay with her while I figured things out. Little did I know, I'd be living there for the next 4 years. I swapped my job working away from home and decided to work nights at the factory instead. This way, I could keep my job even if things went south with the boss's daughter, who I was dating at the time. It didn't last long, but the night shift turned out to be the best job I ever had. The factory received noise complaints because of the machines running at night, so it was decided that the night shift would change blades on the granulators, which chewed up metals. It was noisy, and because of that, our 10-hour shifts were cut down to just 1 hour of work, while still getting paid for the full 10 hours. With all that extra free time, we started having fun. We'd go to the pub or take drives in the summer. The best part was, no matter what job we wanted to do, we could. Imagine being paid to play cards for 8 hours a night. Life felt easy. But then something happened that I still can't explain. I know many people might call it nonsense, but I swear this is 100% true. I've tried for nearly 30 years to prove it was all in my head, but I can't. It happened, and I've got no reason to exaggerate. In fact, I've probably downplayed it. If I had to, I'd even take a polygraph test to prove it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It started one night at work when I was reading a newspaper. I came across a story about an 18-year-old girl named Lisa who took 2 paracetamol pills and tragically died due to an allergic reaction. The article was meant to raise awareness about the dangers of overdosing, but it hit me hard. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't know why, but I found myself feeling deeply emotional about this poor girl, even days later.
I told Mom about it, and she casually said, "Why don't you ask her through the spirit board, SB?" I remember telling her, "Can you do it, please? You know about this stuff, I don't want to." I was scared of ghosts and spirits, so the thought of using a spirit board terrified me. Mom, as usual, just shrugged it off. A couple of days went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling about Lisa. I had to do something about it. One day, when I was alone in the house, I thought, forget it. I'm doing it. I set up the spirit board, even though my nerves were shot. I was terrified, but the thought of this girl wouldn't leave my mind. I began the session, asking for Lisa. At first, the glass moved slowly, and I asked, "Are you Lisa?" The glass pointed to no. Confused, I tried again, unsure of what to do. This time, the glass started spinning in circles, and I was terrified, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't touch the glass, and I knew I wasn't pushing it. It circled for a while, and then it stopped. The glass moved to yes. I asked again, "Are you Lisa?" The answer was another yes. The hairs on my neck and arms stood up, and I felt this overwhelming warmth go through my body. I knew it was her. There was something about it, a certainty I couldn't explain. I can't remember exactly what we spoke about, but I ended the session feeling a sense of peace. It felt like I had closed something, but then, almost immediately after, I got this strange sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was softly blowing on it. It gave me goosebumps. I didn't mention it to anyone at first, chalking it up to excitement. But over the next 2 or 3 days, it kept happening. The feeling wouldn't go away. Eventually, I told Mom what I'd done and what was happening to me. She asked, "I bet you didn't turn the glass over, did you?" She was right. I hadn't. Mom explained that the spirit couldn't leave unless I turned the glass to release it. So, I set up the spirit board again, in a quiet part of the house, and Lisa came through right away. I apologized for not ending the session properly and did it the right way. I didn't plan to contact her again, thinking this would finally close the chapter. But, as you'll see, that wasn't the end of it. A day or two after my first visit to the spiritualist church, I started to think I was going crazy. I kept hearing a voice in my head, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. The voice kept saying, "You need to visit a spiritualist church." It was so strange, because I wasn't religious, I had never heard of a spiritualist church, and on top of that, I was hearing a voice inside my head. If it had only happened once or twice, I could have dismissed it as my imagination, but it kept happening over and over. It was like a constant reminder. So, I told my mom about it, and she said, "She wants you to go. You really should listen and go to the church." I asked, "Who is this person? Why should I go?" Mom said, "She isn't moving on from you. That's why she's keeping you in her thoughts. You need to go." I still wasn't sure, but after a couple of weeks, the voice was still in my head, and I felt like I had no choice. I gave in and decided to visit the nearest spiritualist church. The timing was right since I was working nights, so I could visit the church before heading to work, and I wouldn't be late. This was in the late 1980s, maybe early 90s. When I arrived at the church, I was still in my work clothes, which weren't the best. Changing blades on the granulators at the factory had made them dirty, but I didn't care much. I went in anyway. Inside, there were about 12 or 15 people sitting down. I had no idea what to expect, so I just sat quietly, away from everyone, observing. The service started with hymns and prayers, and I was thinking to myself, this is definitely not my thing. But I stayed because I'd already made the effort to come. After the service, the medium began. She moved from one person to the next, giving messages. I honestly didn't expect anything to happen for me. But then, without warning, she stopped, looked straight at me, and said, I have to give this message to the young man over there. She pointed directly at me. I remember thinking, what the hell? She said, I have a young lady here who is very eager to give you something. She wants you to have this as a gift from her. The medium then described the gift as a big pink heart. And in that instant, I felt a chill run through my body. Goosebumps covered my skin, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I can't explain it, but that moment was powerful, surreal. It felt like something was happening that I couldn't fully understand. She then continued, saying, there are two more spirits here. One is an older gentleman, and the other is a teenage girl. The girl is a little shy. Again, the feeling of goosebumps came back, stronger this time. I was shaken, completely. The medium then started telling me things about my life that seemed impossible for her to know. She mentioned my family name, my birth sign, and the month I was born. These were personal details, things I'd never shared with anyone, especially at the church. This was back before the days of the internet, Google, or mobile phones. There was no way for her to know these things. She couldn't have guessed them. What happened next left me speechless. She mentioned a friend of mine, Martin, who had tragically died in a motorcycle accident. She described the make and color of his bike, even his first name. I had forgotten all about him, but she brought him up as if he were right there with us. It was impossible for her to know this, yet she did. She described things about him, things I had never told anyone. Then, the medium said something that absolutely blew my mind. She said, this teenage girl here, she was close to you, wasn't she? She's with you too. I couldn't believe it. My cousin, who had passed away when I was young, had committed suicide, and I'd never really gotten over it. She knew things about her, things I had never shared with anyone. The medium spoke to me for at least 10 minutes, and every word she said was exactly right. It felt so real, so personal. The connection was undeniable. I was overwhelmed with emotions, and the more she spoke, the more I realized how incredible this experience was. Looking back, I can see now that I had no idea just how special this medium was. At the time, I thought all mediums must be this good. But as I went to other churches and saw other mediums, I realized just how extraordinary she was. She didn't just guess things, she knew them. She told me things no one else could have possibly known. Even after 30 years, I still can't forget the way she spoke to me that night. It was like she was in my head, in my heart, understanding things I didn't even have words for. It's not like I'm completely naive, I know about scams and tricks, and I've heard about all kinds of deceptive methods. But when it's presented to you the way she did, there was no way she could have known me better than anyone else, better than my own parents or best friend. I mean, she just couldn't. But, anyway, I'm getting off track. Let me get back to it. I don't exactly remember when I went back to the church, but I know it was during the week because I had work afterward. That's when everything changed. This time, there were a few trainees up on stage. They were encouraged to speak out if they had received any messages. Almost immediately, one of the women stood up and pointed straight at me. I have a message for him, she said. Once again, I was told there was a young lady who wanted me to hear something. I can't recall the exact words, but it was something along the lines of how I was the most caring person, and she just had to tell me. That wasn't the weird part, though. After that brief message, I wasn't spoken to again the rest of the evening. So, I left, heading to work, walking the couple of miles. But as soon as I started walking, this tune popped into my head. Over and over again. I couldn't shake it. It was the same tune, repeating itself, but I didn't recognize it at all. I couldn't remember where I had heard it, but it was stuck in my mind. By the time I reached work, the song was still there, playing in my head like a loop. It reminded me of the time I first read about Lisa. There was something about that tune, something deeply familiar about it. But I just couldn't place it. Now, at work, I was alone for most of the night, so I had the time to think about it. Slowly, bit by bit, the song started to form in my mind. A snippet of the chorus here, a few more words there. By morning, I could remember every single word of the song. No exaggeration, I had written it all down, trying to make sense of it. I asked the guys at work if they recognized it, but none of them did. No one had ever heard this song before. I remember getting home and asking my mom if she knew it. Without missing a beat, she said, "I know that song." And then she dug around in her record collection, pulled out the vinyl, and put it on the turntable. As it played, I found myself singing along, well, not exactly singing, since I'm definitely not a singer, but I could remember every word. How could that be possible? I hadn't heard it in years, and my mom hadn't played any of her records in ages. It just didn't make sense. But the strangest part? The song was called "Dedicated to the One I Love" by the Mamas and the Papas. And as I heard the title, I got the chills, again, that familiar sense of unease. Goosebumps spread across my skin. It was as if the song itself was trying to tell me something, like it was connected to whatever had been happening with Lisa. From there, things began to slow down a bit. Conversations with Lisa, if you could call them that, started happening more often, but they were always in my head. It was the same way the song had appeared, almost as if her voice just showed up, like it had always been there. Small conversations at first, just little snippets. But as time went on, they grew longer. And eventually, I stopped going to the church. There was no need to anymore. It felt like I had moved on to something else, something deeper, something I couldn't quite explain. Over the next 6 to 12 months, things began to blur together. I kept a diary of everything that happened, but I won't bore you with all the little details. What I do remember, though, is the feeling of those sudden goosebumps, those moments where I would just know Lisa was near. And every time, it would make me smile, knowing she was close, and the emotional weight of it all would hit me again. But even though I never spoke her name aloud, I knew who she was. Her name was Lisa. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Then, about a year after everything started, something else happened. I had no idea what to expect. It was around 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, early Sunday morning, really. As a night worker, I often had trouble sleeping at night. So, on weekends, I'd sleep on the sofa. It was a temporary place for me to rest while I figured things out after the breakup with my first love. I had moved back home with my mom, but it was only supposed to be temporary. That night, I couldn't sleep. It was as if something was tugging at me, something I couldn't ignore. I had no idea what was about to happen. I remember this night like it was yesterday. It was late, and I had just gotten back on the sofa after using the bathroom. I don't quite remember how the conversation began, but suddenly, I was talking to Lisa in my head again. This time, she asked me if I wanted to experience something. There were no details, just a simple question: would I like to try something? Of course, I was curious, so I asked, "Does it hurt?" She replied, "No, you'll be okay." So, I agreed. "Okay, what is it?" She instructed me to lie flat on my back, with my legs hanging over the edge of the sofa. I was completely unsure of what was about to happen, but I couldn't help feeling intrigued. My first thought was that maybe she was going to show herself to me, like a ghost or a spirit. But until now, all I'd experienced were these strange, random goosebumps and a warm, fuzzy sensation every so often. Lisa asked again, "Are you ready?" I got comfortable, nodded, and said, "Yes." The moment those words left my mouth, it felt like nothing I've ever experienced before. It wasn't just a feeling, it was pure bliss, the best way I can describe it. Words can't do it justice, but imagine this: every molecule in my body seemed to come alive. It was like being plugged into some kind of energy source, and every part of me was dancing. To put it simply, if you've ever felt an overwhelming rush of intense sensation, multiply that by 10, and you might begin to understand how powerful it felt. But it wasn't just a quick burst. This sensation lasted for a good 30 to 35 seconds. It wasn't like the buildup you feel before a climax either. There was no tension in my stomach or that feeling deep in your toes. This was full-body euphoria. It was like every part of me was vibrating with an energy I couldn't even comprehend. Even now, after 30 years, I can still remember that feeling so vividly. It's something I've never been able to explain, and honestly, I don't think words will ever do it justice. I've never done drugs, but I imagine it's like the rush you get from an intense high, only 100 times more intense. It felt unreal. I couldn't help but ask, what was that? She just calmly replied, would you like to feel it again? Well, of course, I said yes. And this time, the sensation was even stronger, a bit longer, and more intense than the first. But the feeling was almost the same, a vibrant, all-encompassing rush that lasted even longer. It was like nothing I had ever felt, and I couldn't help but be in awe. The feeling of every atom in my body dancing with energy, it was beyond anything I had ever experienced. There's something important to note here, this wasn't a dreamlike experience. I had gotten up to use the bathroom earlier, so I knew I was awake. As a night worker, I often found it hard to sleep during weekends, so I was completely conscious the entire time. I wasn't dreaming, not by any stretch of the imagination. For years, I never spoke about this experience. Not to anyone. Not even my mom. Imagine trying to explain to someone, especially your mother, that a spirit had made you feel something more intense than any physical experience you'd ever had. At that point in my life, I didn't care if anyone believed me or not. I knew what I had experienced, and that was enough. Skeptical, I decided to look it up, and to my astonishment, everything I'd experienced was described there, in print. It wasn't just a weird one-off experience. I had, as strange as it sounds, had an intense encounter with a spirit. The book said that the sensation I felt could never be matched by a physical experience. It also said that once you experience something like that, you'll always crave it again. But there was more. The book mentioned that those who are fortunate enough to feel this kind of energy will eventually become spirits themselves when the time comes. After reading that, it was like everything clicked. The feelings I had, the goosebumps, the vivid sensations, the connection with Lisa, it all made sense now. I may never experience that kind of energy again, but the truth is, it was unlike anything I've ever felt in my life. And even now, all these years later, I still ask for it to happen again. But it never has. I know people are quick to label mediums as frauds, 99.9% of them probably are, but I can't ignore the fact that this one medium was so spot on. If she had been fishing for information, I'd expect her to get something wrong, but no. She nailed it, every single time. And the same goes for the spirit box sessions. I was alone in the house, the only one touching the glass, and there was just too much that happened for it to be a coincidence. If I were to go through my old diary, I'm sure I could tell you even more unbelievable things. But let me move on. I've had a couple of other experiences that aren't connected to the ones I've shared already. This last one, thankfully, touch wood, was the last time I encountered something, well, otherworldly, for lack of a better word. It happened around 25 years ago now. It all started when I met an ex-partner at my mom's wedding back in 1996. The reception was at a pub nearby, about 2 miles from where I lived. I showed up with one girlfriend, danced with another girl, and then, before I knew it, I found myself being dumped by the first one and having a flirtatious chat with the barmaid. By the end of the night, she became my new girlfriend. The next day, my mom, new stepdad, and I went back to the pub to thank them for a wonderful day. The barmaid was there, and, as you can guess, we hit it off and ended up dating for the next 3 years. It was actually a bit of a full-circle moment for me because I had known the pub owners for years. When I turned 18, I used to hang out at their previous pub, and the owner, a guy named Peter, had taught me how to play pool. We spent many late nights playing, and eventually, I joined their pool team. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I bumped into them again at my mom's wedding, it was like reconnecting with old friends. They had moved to a new pub, and, of course, my new girlfriend was the barmaid there. Over time, I spent more and more time at the pub, and I even started working there. By the end of our relationship, I had become part of the staff, trusted to run the reception room on occasion. I loved the job. Every week was something new: a wedding, a birthday, people celebrating. As an outgoing guy, I got along with a lot of the guests. After the bar closed and everyone had left, I'd help my girlfriend clean up the function room. But there was one night, after a particularly busy evening, when I was just too tired to stay and clean. I asked if I could come back the next morning to finish the job, and they agreed. So, Sunday morning, I made my way to the pub. The landlady was in the kitchen preparing food for the Sunday lunches, and Peter, her husband, was out somewhere. I said hello and made my way upstairs to the function room. It was a mess, glasses everywhere, chairs askew, but I got to work. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. About an hour into cleaning, I heard something strange: laughter. A little girl's laugh. I stopped and listened, but the noise stopped too. I shrugged it off and carried on cleaning. A few minutes later, I heard it again, a longer laugh this time. It seemed to be coming from the owner's bedroom, which was right next to the function room. I assumed Dot's grandchild had arrived, and didn't think too much of it. But as I continued working, I kept hearing that laughter. It wasn't constant, but it was there. It was like she was playing, having fun in the room. About an hour later, when I was finally finished cleaning, I went downstairs to the kitchen where Dot was still prepping. I mentioned that I had heard her grandchild upstairs and was surprised no one had checked in on her. Dot turned around, surprised. "My grandchild isn't here," she said. I was confused. "But I heard her laughing, Dot." "I swear, I heard her in your bedroom." Dot paused for a moment and then, without skipping a beat, said, "Oh, that little girl. She haunts upstairs. Don't worry about her, she's harmless. She just likes to laugh sometimes." The way she said it was so matter-of-fact, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. But here's the thing, Dot didn't know about my fear of ghosts. I didn't go around telling people that. But if you'd grown up in my dad's house, where I'd been physically attacked and heard strange noises, you'd understand why I was scared of anything ghostly. Even now, at 54, I won't go into that house by myself, not when it's dark, not when I'm alone. That house scarred me for life. So when Dot casually mentioned the little girl, it hit me hard. I didn't even know what to think. What kind of ghost was she talking about? Was this some kind of prank? But Dot didn't seem worried at all. She just smiled and said, "Don't mind her, she's been here for years. She's just a little mischievous, that's all." And that was that. It was weird and unsettling, but also strangely comforting in its simplicity. The ghost, if that's what it was, wasn't malicious, just playful. Still, the fear that had been ingrained in me from my experiences at my dad's house made it hard to just brush it off. To this day, I can't say I fully understand what happened. But that's how it was. I knew there was something there, something I couldn't explain, but for once, it didn't feel like an attack. It was just a ghostly laugh. And that was enough for me to call it a night. After everything I've experienced, the whole haunted pub situation felt like the final straw. That night, when I heard the little girl laughing in the function room, I couldn't shake it off. I didn't even need to ask anyone what it was, I just knew. That feeling, combined with the history of strange things that had happened to me, made it impossible to ignore. So, I left the job that very same day. And, as strange as it sounds, that decision also ended my 3-year relationship with the barmaid. The fear I'd carried with me from my dad's house was too much to overcome. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that some places are just wrong. I can sense it now, almost immediately. It's like a vibe, something deep inside that tells me if a place is good or bad. It happened again just 10 years ago when my gran was in the hospital. I stayed with her in her flat, and within 5 minutes of walking through the door, I knew something wasn't right. There was just this heavy feeling in the air. I tried to brush it off, but I stayed only one night. The next day, when Gran was back home and feeling better, I casually brought up the subject of spirits. She shared with me that, often, she'd see an old lady standing at the foot of her bed. My blood ran cold when she said that. I'll be honest, I never stayed in that flat again. Even now, my partner and I live in a house that's relatively new. We've been renting here for almost 2 decades, partly because there are no strange vibes. No ghostly presence to make me feel uneasy. It's a safe, quiet place, and it's the only way I can live. The thing that sticks with me about the pub story is this: if I weren't someone who already believed in spirits, if I were a skeptic, how could I explain what happened that day? I heard that little girl laugh, even though I knew it was just me and the landlady in the pub at the time. How do you dismiss that kind of experience? You can try, but deep down, you can't. I'm not a religious person, and I've never had any experiences that led me to believe in God or the teachings of Jesus. Similarly, I haven't had any UFO encounters, except for one. I saw something once, and to this day, I can only describe it as a UFO. So, in that sense, I do believe. But when it comes to ghosts, well, unless you've had your own experience, it's easy to dismiss it. But once you've heard something you can't explain, or seen something out of the ordinary, you can't just brush it off. It happened around 8 to 10 years ago. My partner and I were getting ready for an afternoon nap one Sunday, just like we always did. I'd taken off my slippers and left them at the bottom of the stairs, a usual habit of mine. My partner went upstairs first, and I followed shortly after. An hour or so later, I went downstairs to find one slipper gone. I asked my partner if she had moved it, and she said no. I couldn't find it anywhere. We searched the house for over an hour, but still no slipper. At this point, we started to think maybe one of us had misplaced it, but both of us were sure it had been left at the bottom of the stairs. We kept looking, but no luck. The next day, we turned the house upside down, looking in every corner, under every piece of furniture. Our house isn't big, so it didn't take long to search the whole place. And yet, the slipper was nowhere to be found. No one else had access to the house, no friends or family had a key. We thought about every possible scenario, but none of them made sense. I was the last one upstairs, and we came down together. It wasn't possible for anyone else to have taken it. Yet, the slipper was gone. 3 days later, after I'd bought a new pair of slippers, we went upstairs for another nap. The same thing happened. My partner went up first, and I followed shortly after. When it was time to go back downstairs, I reached the bottom of the stairs this time. Both slippers were right there. I was completely puzzled. It wasn't like we had misplaced it. It was almost as if the missing slipper had never existed in the first place. We've lived in this house for so many years, and yet I can't explain what happened with that slipper. But when you've experienced things like this, it's hard not to wonder. So there I was, standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the slipper that was sitting exactly where I had left it on Sunday. The only problem? I knew that slipper hadn't been there all those days. I turned to my partner, and with a mix of disbelief and laughter, I said, "There's absolutely no way that slipper's there." We both stared at it, exchanged glances, and then burst into laughter, half in confusion, half in amazement. But even though we laughed, deep down we knew something strange had happened. Neither of us had hidden it. It was impossible to have missed that slipper for 3 whole days in a small house like ours. We'd thought about every possible explanation, and none of them made sense. How could both of us miss it? How could something that clearly wasn't there suddenly be there, without either of us tripping over it in the process? There was also the time when I had placed my driving glasses down to put my jumper on, only to find they disappeared without a trace. The weird thing was, my partner eventually found them days later on the other side of the room, under the radiator. There was a possible explanation for this one, albeit a very unlikely one, so I don't consider it as eerie as the slipper incident. Still, the fact that they vanished within 20 seconds, and I needed them for a 500-mile round trip, makes it hard to brush off. But the slipper story? That one still baffles me. To this day, my partner insists she didn't take the slipper, and I know she didn't. She would never do something like that, and if by some strange chance she had, she wouldn't have denied it for 3 days. But somehow, we're left with only one answer: neither of us did it. We thought about everything, from a potential break-in to some kind of collective memory lapse, but nothing fit. The house is small, and there's no way we could have missed it. I joked with my partner after watching an episode of Spooks, suggesting that someone could have picked the lock and quietly taken the slipper, then brought it back 3 days later. It's a crazy idea, but at that point, we'd run out of plausible explanations. Now, 18 years have passed since we moved into this house. No one has a key, and the slipper incident remains one of the two weirdest things that's happened here, the other being the glasses. But still, both of us were in the room when the glasses went missing, and they turned up in the most unlikely place. The slipper, though, that's a mystery we've never solved. I've always wondered what could be behind these strange occurrences. I'm not religious, never have been, never will be. I've never been told by Lisa or anyone else about God, Jesus, or any of that. And I'd like to think that if there was something more out there, Lisa would have told me. But we never talked about religion, not once. It's just never come up, probably because of everything we've been through together. I still visit my dad, who's now 81 and living in the same house I grew up in. He insists he's never experienced anything odd, but my dad's the kind of person who doesn't believe in much of anything. Even if he had seen something, he'd likely chalk it up to his imagination or a few too many drinks. The weird thing is that his partner, who's lived with him for 34 years, is terrified of that house. She's never told me directly, but I've seen it. She's never left alone in the house at night. If my dad goes out, she goes with him. And here's the strange part: I've never said a word to her about the house or my experiences. So, it's a little unnerving that she's so afraid of it, without knowing anything about the history. Now I'm 54, and the idea of spending a night alone in that house? Not a chance. I've thought about what I'll do when my dad eventually passes. Part of me wonders if I should set up cameras to see if they capture anything, but that's just an idea for now. My brother, Ja, lived in the house for a while and experienced some things, but he handled it much better than I did. He wasn't physically attacked or scared senseless like I was. Maybe that's why he seemed less affected by it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
But for me, that house, and everything that happened in it, will never be something I can just forget. Even after all these years, I'm still not ready to face it on my own. I do believe, and although I can sit through a good horror movie these days, I still get uneasy. This is true even at my mum's house, even now. Mum passed away suddenly in 2012, leaving behind my half-brother, John. John has a mental age of about 8, despite being 39. Over the years, I've fought to keep him in Mum's house, out of the care system. My brother John and I look after him, and I visit about once every 3 months, staying a few nights, often in Mum's bed. Even so, I still get the EBGBs some nights. I'll sleep with the light on. It's my own mother's house, but I can't help it. It's better than it was, though. I started out on the sofa, but a friend of Mum's told me she's not going to harm her own son. It made sense, so I eventually moved into Mum's bed. But even with that reassurance, I still feel uneasy sometimes. The last time I was there was just 2 weeks ago, and every night, something spooked me. I had the light on for the rest of the night, again. It's strange, because I haven't felt anything specific, just that gnawing feeling of being watched or that something isn't quite right. The thing with Lisa isn't as intense anymore. I still try to convince myself that she's still around, but the truth is, I haven't felt her presence or spoken to her in years. I occasionally try to talk to her in my mind, but it feels more like my own subconscious talking back. It's nothing like it was 30 years ago, when I knew it was her. Back then, I could feel her presence all the time, those random goosebumps, like someone softly blowing on your neck. I haven't had that feeling in years. I've been meaning to book a session with a good spiritualist. The problem is, with the internet, I'd never be 100% sure I wasn't being looked up beforehand. Some good spiritualists even recommend booking under a false name to avoid that, so that's something I've thought about. The best ones are often booked up for up to 12 months, so I know it's not going to happen anytime soon. Since I last went to a spiritualist church, I've lost several loved ones: my mom, my my daughter, 2 uncles, and an aunt. But I've never felt my mom, who died in November 2012, or my with whom I was inseparable in her later years. I was the one who made sure her wishes were honored. She didn't want to go into a care home, so I kept her out, despite my mom being her next of kin. When she went into hospital, I stayed up with her for over 3 months, visiting every day. That's how close we were. Maybe I've lost the gift. Or maybe I've upset them somehow. Maybe they can't travel the distance, with me living 250 miles away. I don't know. I'm not an expert in these things. But I do feel like I haven't felt that connection with them like I did with Lisa. It's important for me to say this so I'm not fooling anyone into thinking I'm still in contact with Lisa, or that these things still happen. The truth is, apart from the slipper incident in our current house, I haven't had anything strange happen, or at least, nothing I can explain. Wifey thinks other things have disappeared and then reappeared, but they didn't involve me, so I'm not counting them. I've tried to debunk these experiences many times over my life. Someone mentioned that in the 70s, homes with gas fires caused hallucinations from the fumes. That could explain some of the things I saw. Maybe it even accounts for the sounds we heard on the stairs if both of us were affected at the same time. But it doesn't explain the sensation of unease, especially at my dad's house or the time I stayed at my grand's flat. When I stayed at her flat, I just knew something wasn't right. It's hard to describe, but I could feel it in my bones. If I do end up seeing a good spiritualist, I'll be sure to share the experience. But for now, that's all of it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
Springfield was one of 3 cottages built by my great-great-grandfather along Locks Road, once a quiet country lane in a small village on the south coast of Hampshire. The first house, known as Dorcas Cottage, was my great-great-grandfather's family home. He later built 2 more Edwardian-style semis for his sons, one of whom was my great-grandfather. Dorcas Cottage was named after my great-grandfather's sister, Dorcas, who had been tragically murdered by her boyfriend on a railway bridge not far from the house. The tragedy seemed to set a grim tone for the family. Not long after, in the early 1900s, my grandmother's young brother, Joe, tragically fell into a copper boiler and died from scalding burns. A few years later, her mother succumbed to a slow, painful death from consumption, or tuberculosis. The house seemed to carry these memories with it, and over the years, strange things began to happen. About 50 years later, my father, who was not one to believe in the supernatural, was shocked by what he saw one evening. He described a semi-transparent figure of a woman in white dressed in an Edwardian-style gown, drifting around the site of those early tragedies. The presence felt familiar, almost like a lingering memory. My grandmother also had an unsettling connection to the place. She often told me that she avoided walking past the site of the old tragedy after dark. When she visited her brother and sisters in the evening, she would take a different route home, never wanting to be near the house once the sun had set. I had my own strange experience years later. I remember walking past the old building and suddenly feeling as though someone was watching me. It wasn't just the eerie quiet of the place, it was something more. Strange noises, banging, rattling, seemed to come from an old outbuilding next door. The air felt heavy, and the sense of unease stayed with me long after I'd left. That spot has since been developed, and now a small, cramped house stands in its place. But the memories linger. In the early 2000s, the house was still a source of strange occurrences. By this time, my grandmother had passed away, but I could still sense her presence in the house, even though it was now only my uncle and his wife living there. One evening, a visitor was reversing her car in the driveway when she swore she saw someone walk behind the car, moving into the path of her reversing lights. When asked to describe the figure, she gave an uncanny description of my grandmother, her hair, her posture, even the style and color of her clothes. This visitor had never met my grandmother, who had passed away just a year earlier. Another strange event happened when my wife and I were visiting my uncle. We were sitting in his lounge when he stood at the doorway, deep in conversation with us about something controversial. Suddenly, there was a tremendous noise, loud banging and shaking, from the staircase behind him. It was so unsettling that it couldn't be ignored, yet my uncle, strangely, paid no attention to it. We later learned that his wife often heard my grandmother's voice calling her name, though it was never a pleasant sound. It was always in a scolding tone, like my grandmother was reprimanding her. My uncle's wife was terrified by it, but no one in the house seemed to want to acknowledge it. A few months later, they sold the house. We helped them move, and as they left for the last time, my aunt closed her eyes, refusing to look back, and simply said, "Just get me out of here." It wasn't until a family Christmas party, years later, that my uncle finally admitted the truth. He had experienced strange things during his time in that house, things he had never talked about before. He, too, hated going upstairs after dark, describing a strange atmosphere, almost like something evil was lurking. My sister recalled a particularly unsettling nightmare she'd had as a child. In it, she went into our great-aunt's room, only to see a boy in Edwardian clothes climbing through the window. She thought it was just a bad dream, until she visited our great-aunt later and found her visibly upset. When my sister asked what was wrong, she snapped, "Why did you come into my room with that boy the other night?" My sister was stunned, replying, "I didn't, only to be told, 'Yes, you did. You came through the window with him.'" That happened over 25 years ago, but my sister still remembers it as if it were yesterday. My family background is a bit of a mix: Irish, Romani, English, Scottish, Norwegian, and even a little Jewish blood all rolled into one. It's a bit complicated, but when it comes to the supernatural, my maternal grandmother always assured me that I was part of a long line of women with a certain gift. You see, in our family traditions, the youngest girl in each generation is believed to be gifted with the spirit world, though each person experiences it differently. As the youngest girl of my generation, I was expected to embrace it. To be honest, I didn't have much of a choice. Since I was a toddler, I've seen things others couldn't: people, animals, and even buildings. You can read about those in my story I See Dead Houses. One of the first spirits to visit me was my paternal grandmother, who passed away when my dad was only 12, many years before I was born. She has guided me through my life, just as my maternal grandmother did. While my mother never fully accepted her own gift, she couldn't deny that she saw and heard things others didn't. My maternal grandmother used to say I was both a conjurer and a conduit, someone who could summon spirits, but also guide them when they were drawn to me. I often met spirits in my everyday life. Sometimes even when I was driving 1 or 2 times, I'd suddenly feel a presence in the passenger seat beside me. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. But one of the earliest memories I have of this gift is from when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I was playing in the downstairs hall of our old Victorian townhouse in London. My imaginary friends were there, though my mom would later admit that she saw them, too. There was a little girl about my age, whose name I can't remember now, my 2 white bunnies with red eyes, and my little monkey with a long tail. I was happily playing with them when I suddenly decided I needed another friend, something bigger. Without thinking much about it, I asked the air around me for a big white teddy bear to play with. As I did, I felt a rush of hot air swirl around the stairs, but I ignored it, not thinking much of it. Then I heard it, the sound of a loud throat clearing, the way my granddad used to clear his throat when he wanted to talk to me. It came from about halfway up the stairs. I remember being too distracted by my new wish to even notice at first, but as the throat clearing continued, I realized the sound wasn't coming from my granddad at all. When I looked up, I saw him, the teddy bear I had wished for. He stood there, halfway up the stairs, watching me. At first, I was mesmerized by his soft, white, curly fur, his long arms, and little paws. He had a round, fat belly that made him look like the sweetest teddy bear, but when I looked closer, something was very wrong. His face was terrifying. His nose was long, flat, and almost as wide as his face. His mouth was full of sharp, long teeth, more than seemed possible for his small teddy bear mouth. His eyes were large, glowing red, like dying embers in a fire. And then there were his horns, large, curly, and almost too big for his head. As I stared at him, trying to figure out what I was seeing, I noticed that his paws weren't paws at all, but long fingers with sharp, retractable claws. I didn't know what to make of it, but I could feel the terror creeping in. He watched me for what felt like an eternity. My imaginary friends vanished into the cupboard under the stairs, leaving me alone with this thing. Then, to my growing horror, the bear spoke. He asked if I wanted to play with him. He knew all the games I loved, dollies, roller skating, even playing shops, and he promised to clean up afterward. He seemed to know everything about me, even things I hadn't told anyone. For a moment, I almost felt like maybe he was just a strange teddy bear, like a polar bear I had seen on TV a few days before. It sounds strange now, but back then, I thought maybe he was harmless. But then I felt the weight of his stare, like a predator sizing up its prey. I told him I didn't like the way he was staring at me, because my mummy always said that staring was rude. That's when everything changed. He grew angry. He told me that unless I took his hand, he wouldn't play with me. His hand was huge, with long, sharp nails. I hesitated. As a small child, I wondered if it would be worth the trouble to go with this large, horned teddy bear. But something inside me told me it wasn't right. Just as he started tapping his foot impatiently, I noticed a familiar figure walking down the hall. It was my paternal grandmother, Granny X, as I called her. She had passed away years before, but she had been with me from the start, watching over me. Without hesitation, Granny X spoke softly to the teddy bear, telling him to go back to whatever dark place he had come from. The bear argued, claiming that I had summoned him and was now his. But Granny X stood firm, telling him that I, being just a child, could never have deliberately called something like him. I'm not sure if she avoided saying the word demon in front of me, but it felt like she was trying to shield me from understanding the full truth. The argument grew louder, until my mother appeared in the doorway. She froze when she saw the bear on the stairs, and I told her, Granny X is telling the bad teddy bear to go away. My mom didn't see Granny X, but she could hear her through me. Granny X told my mom to stay where she was and not to move. As my mom held me close, Granny X continued her quiet conversation with the bear. I remember watching in silence as the teddy bear began to shrink. His huge form seemed to collapse in on itself, becoming smaller and smaller, until he was gone, vanished without a trace. There was no noise, no flash of light, just silence. That night, my imaginary friends returned, and they told me the bear had been very bad. My brown teddy, the one I'd always cuddled, was much nicer. He wouldn't get me into trouble. About a week later, my maternal grandmother told me I had conjured the teddy bear. She said that I needed to be careful about what I wished for in the future, for there could be darker things drawn to me if I wasn't. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant, but as I grew older, it became clear. Since then, I've been much more careful about what I summon. I've had other encounters with spirits, but none quite as terrifying as that day with the demon bear. Granny X still watches over me, as she did when my children were born, and I feel that she was with me when my baby passed away shortly after birth. She was there, guiding my child to wherever they went. I've learned to keep my gifts in check, but sometimes, when I least expect it, they slip through, like when my little dog passed away, and I would see her rug move, or hear the soft click of her claws on the floor. I may not always control it, but I know my family, my husband, and especially my daughter, who has inherited this gift, understand the strange world I live in. And while the teddy bear may be gone, Granny X will always be there, watching over me and those I love. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I've been meaning to share my experience after reading a story from a girl who stayed in the university lodges in Warwick. I too stayed in rooms connected to the building where training courses and meetings were held, and my experience was unsettling. It was back in 2017. I had signed up for a week-and-a-half-long training course. The first week went smoothly. I stayed in the same room the whole time, and there was nothing out of the ordinary, no bad vibes, no weird feelings. But when I came back after the weekend, something was different. I was given a different room, maybe 152 or 158, I'm not entirely sure. The moment I opened the door, I noticed a strange smell. It was damp, but not overpowering. I didn't think much of it at first. I unpacked my things and sat on the bed. I felt a bit anxious, but I figured it was just nerves about the course and being away from home again. That evening, after training, I went back to the room to shower and change. But something about it felt off. I couldn't pinpoint why, but I didn't feel right there. I went to the bar to meet a friend and have a few drinks, nothing too crazy, just a couple. I wasn't drunk, but when I returned to the room, the unease was still there. I turned on the TV and tried to relax, but I kept glancing towards the corner of the room. I couldn't explain it, but my attention kept being drawn to that spot. After a while, I gave up on the TV and went to bed. It was a hot summer night, and at some point, I woke up suddenly. I was lying on my side, my back to the window, and I felt drenched in sweat. My heart was racing, and anxiety was gripping me. I couldn't catch my breath, and I thought I was having a panic attack, something I'd never experienced before. I had this overwhelming urge to look at that corner again, the one I couldn't stop staring at earlier. The room was dark, but the corner was even darker, like the shadows there were thicker. Then, without thinking, I started saying something aloud. I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk. Over and over. My breathing was still erratic, but I managed to calm myself down, convincing myself it was just a strange, sleepless night. Maybe I was coming down with something, like food poisoning. I eventually fell back to sleep, but I woke up again in the same position on my side, facing away from the window. I turned onto my stomach and then slowly looked to the left, towards the window. The light coming through the gap in the window frame cast a strange shadow, and in it, I saw something. It was black, jet black, with no clear shape, but it had arms. The arms were moving in a jerky way, reaching toward me. Then, I heard a scream. It took me a moment to realize it was me. I was paralyzed with fear. I've always been pretty fearless, but what I was seeing had me completely shaken. I curled up under the sheets, shaking. I stayed like that, hidden, for what felt like an eternity. As the morning light began to filter in, I slowly peeked out from under the sheets. The room looked normal now. Nothing was out of place. I took a deep breath and quickly ran to the door, throwing it open and rushing to the reception, still in my boxer shorts. When the staff arrived, I told them I needed a new room. They looked a little confused at first, probably because I was standing there half-dressed. They asked what was wrong with the room, and I told them it wasn't the room itself, but what was in it. To my surprise, they didn't seem shocked. They just nodded and said, "Okay, we know what you mean." They gave me a new room, but I had to go back to the old one to get dressed. The moment I stepped back in, I felt that presence again. It was like an overwhelming sense of despair, like something was hanging over me, pressing down on me. It was intense, almost suffocating. I quickly grabbed my things, but as I stepped into the bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trying to reach out to me. It was like it wanted me to talk to it. The new room was fine, but the unease stayed with me for a while. Even after I settled in, I still couldn't shake the feeling. And for months afterward, I had dreams about it, strange, unsettling dreams I couldn't quite remember, but they always left me with a sense of dread. It wasn't until a year later that I finally started feeling like I'd shaken it off. I've had a few supernatural experiences in my life. In my younger days, I was intrigued by what we call the supernatural, and it sometimes felt like I was a magnet for these strange occurrences. Let's just say I dabbled, but I don't anymore. This was my first real encounter with something I couldn't explain. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter to me, but what does matter is that after all these years, I finally get to tell the story. It all started in a modest basement bedsit on King Street, Brighton, Sussex, England. For my parents, newly arrived in the area with a small child, it seemed like a lucky find. The rent was cheap, the location was convenient, and they decided to settle in temporarily, until they could find something more suitable. I was that small child. The first morning, when my mother pulled back the heavy curtains to let in the early sunlight, I stood on the window seat, eager to see what lay outside. Down below, a group of workmen were resurfacing the road. The smell of hot tarmac filled the air, and the sound of the steamroller rumbling down the street was almost magical to my 4-year-old self. I waved frantically at the driver, and to my surprise, he spotted me and waved back. I hadn't even had breakfast yet, but I had just made my first friend of the day a steamroller driver. The joy I felt in that moment was enough to convince me that this place was going to be wonderful. I even developed a strange affection for the smell of hot tarmac, which I still find comforting to this day. But that night, things began to change. The strange dreams started almost immediately. The room had an old gas cooker, positioned directly opposite the foot of my bed. It was a modest, careworn appliance with 2 small burners at the back and a larger one in front. A grill sat beneath it, and a separate oven was below that. But for some reason, this cooker seemed to dominate the room. That night, I woke with a start. The room felt freezing cold, and the damp, musty smell was stronger than before. I peered into the darkness, and through the gloom, I could just make out the cooker. It wasn't glowing, but it felt present, as though it had a dark energy radiating from it. It almost seemed to be breathing, the sides expanding and contracting, as though something was trying to break free. What a strange dream, I thought, but the more I tried to wake up, the harder it became. I couldn't escape the dream. My fear grew as I watched the cooker, and then, slowly, something began to emerge. First, there was an ethereal mist rising from the gas rings. It hovered just above the stove, twisting and curling, like smoke or cloud. And then, it began to take shape. 2 smaller, indistinct forms emerged from the 2 back burners. Their faces were vague, like the patterns you see in the grain of wood when you stare at it for too long, shifting, hiding, almost playful. But the larger figure rising from the front burner was far more ominous. It was darker, larger, and its presence filled the room with dread. I couldn't move. My heart raced, but I couldn't scream or run. So, like any frightened 4-year-old, I did the only thing I could think of. I buried myself under the blankets and tried to block it all out. When I awoke the next morning, I thought it must have been a nightmare. The cooker was still there, of course, but it was just a mundane, old appliance. The workmen were still outside, busy with the steamroller, and they waved to me again as I looked out the window. Everything seemed normal, except for the sense of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. That night, the dreams returned. The 2 smaller figures emerged again, but now their faces were more defined, pale, with inky black eyes and mouths like empty voids. I felt a strange connection to them, as though we were all trapped in our own little worlds, me in my room, and they within the cooker. But it was the larger figure that terrified me. She would rise up from the cooker, flanked by the 2 smaller shapes, and drift toward me. It was like watching a shadow stretch across the room. The temperature would drop, and I could smell that dank, musty odor like something forgotten in the back of an old cupboard. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as the dreams became more frequent, her presence became undeniable. She was always by my bed, on the left side, just standing there in the dark. I never dared look directly at her, but I could see her enough to know she was there. Her face was thin, with a pointed chin, and her eyes were black voids. Her mouth was a narrow line, which would occasionally open to emit a soundless moan, as if she were trying to speak. She wore an old, black pleated dress, the fabric worn and frayed at the edges, and there was a strange luminescence to it, like the iridescence of a crow's feathers in the moonlight. I couldn't explain why, but even though I was terrified, I couldn't stop myself from falling asleep, my eyes clamped shut beneath the sheets. I knew she was there, but somehow, I couldn't keep my eyes open forever. It wasn't until later, when I was much older, that I learned from my mother that I had been waking up every night at exactly 3 a.m., saying, "Make the lady go away." She's standing by my bed. I didn't remember saying that, but hearing it explained a lot. The worst part of all was when the entity became able to leave the cooker. She would float around the room, sometimes approaching me from unexpected angles, always silent, always looming. She would stand there beside my bed, and I could feel her coldness seeping through the blankets, chilling me to the bone. The room would feel suffocating, as if the very air was thick with her presence. I began to recognize when she was near. There would be a sudden drop in temperature, and I would smell that musty, old-clothes scent before I even saw her. I would watch the cooker, dread filling me, knowing she was coming. One day, my mother had to step out for a moment, leaving me alone in the room. When I looked up, I saw a woman standing in the doorway. I didn't recognize her, but she spoke to me in a calm voice, telling me she wanted to play a game. I didn't question it. I was a lonely child, craving attention. She instructed me to gather a towel and a cushion, then to open the oven door and place the cushion on it. I was to drape a towel over the grill handle and turn on the gas. I was hesitant, but she reassured me, her voice gentle, and I followed her instructions. I felt sleepy, as though in a trance, and when I breathed in the gas, a strange calm came over me. It didn't smell too bad. I almost felt like everything would be okay. But then I heard the sound of the key turning in the door, and I snapped out of my stupor. I quickly shut the oven and sat on the floor, pretending I hadn't been doing anything wrong. My mother walked in, noticed the smell, and opened the window, but thankfully, she didn't realize what I had almost done. Soon after, we moved out of that basement room, and the strange dream stopped. From that moment on, I never saw the lady again. But the memory of her, and that old cooker, stayed with me for years. Looking back, I wonder if I was just part of a tragic reenactment. Perhaps the lady had once been a mother too, and I was a replacement for a lost child. Or maybe she was just looking for a new playmate for the children she kept trapped inside the cooker. The whole experience has left me with more questions than answers, but one thing is certain, that room, and the things within it, were never meant to be a part of this world.
We moved into our current house in 2017, and right from the start, we knew we weren't alone. At first, it was small things, footsteps echoing when no one was around, or catching a glimpse of movement out of the corner of our eyes, only to turn and find nothing there. It wasn't always obvious, but there was definitely something off about the place. One time, my eldest son, who's 13 now but still small for his age, came into the kitchen asking for a drink. From where I stood, I could see the staircase if the side door was open, and at that moment, it was. I was busy making him a drink when I saw a small boy run up the stairs. It didn't seem strange at first. I thought it was my son going back upstairs. But when I turned around to hand him his drink, there he was, sitting on the sofa in the living room. My two other children were at school, and there was no one else at home. There were other instances where I'd feel a child run past me, brushing against my leg, and when I spun around to check who it was, nobody was there. My 3 kids were nowhere near me. But the strangest experience happened in the middle of the night. To set the scene, the upstairs of the house is laid out like this: standing in the bathroom, facing the doorway as if about to step out, you'd find my daughter's room immediately on the right, then my room, and directly across from the bathroom door is my 2 sons' room. The staircase is to the left, a U-turn from the bathroom. It was around 2:30 a.m. I'd woken up to use the bathroom, and just as I was about to leave, I saw a pair of small, child-sized legs run from my daughter's room across in front of me and disappear down the stairs. There was nothing else, just the legs. Now, my daughter was sleeping at a friend's house that night, so there was no one in her room. For some strange reason, I decided to check that my sons were still in their room. I honestly don't know why, considering I had only seen legs, but I went in and found them both fast asleep. What's even stranger is that I clearly heard the unmistakable sound of a child's footsteps running by, just like I'd seen. But when I checked on my sons, they were sound asleep in bed. It wasn't until I did some digging that I discovered something chilling. In the early 90s, a young boy, just 5 years old, had tragically fallen down the stairs and died in the very house we now live in. His name was Jamie. Ever since I learned about Jamie, whenever I see or hear something when I'm supposed to be alone, I simply say, "Hi Jamie," and carry on. It's strange how, over time, the eerie feeling of these encounters has become almost normal. Instead of feeling scared, I feel a sort of odd peace. Janie seems harmless, just a kid, maybe still wandering the house in his own way. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.
My name is Chantel, and I'm 29 years old. This is a story that still lingers in my mind, even years later. 3 years ago, my 2-year-old son was diagnosed with leukemia, and we had to stay at a children's cancer ward for what we thought would be a few weeks. The hospital itself was old, built back in 1876, and the ward was, well, eerie. Quiet. Almost too quiet at night, which gave it a strange, unsettling feel. A few days into our stay, something started to happen, something I couldn't explain. One night, around 9 p.m., I found myself wide awake. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. I decided to get up and make myself a drink in the parents' room. It was a small, quiet space where you could prepare food, grab a coffee, or just sit for a moment of peace. I had been there for just a few minutes when I started hearing something, a soft, almost melodic hum. It was coming from behind me, toward the door. It sounded like a lullaby, the kind you'd hum to a child. I turned around, expecting to see someone, maybe a mother with a baby. But when I looked, the room was empty. Curious and a little unsettled, I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The ward was dark, as it always was late at night. I looked down the hall, but there was no one in sight. The humming stopped as soon as I stepped out. A chill ran down my spine. I hurried back to my bed, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. Then, there was another night. I had gone to the bathroom, just a quick visit. As I stood there, the taps turned on by themselves. The sound of running water echoed in the silence, and then, without warning, the toilet flushed on its own. It was unnerving, but it didn't stop there. A whisper, so close to my ear, filled the space. It was faint, like a voice trying to speak, but I couldn't make out the words. It was as if something, or someone, was right there with me. I froze, a cold sensation crawling up my spine. Panic set in, and without thinking, I rushed out of the bathroom. It was hard to shake the feeling of unease after that. But I tried to ignore it. Focus on my son. Focus on the treatment. Towards the end of our stay, one night, I was fast asleep beside my son. Then, I heard it, a loud voice, so clear, so urgent, that it felt like it was inside my head. "Chantel, wake up." I jolted upright, heart hammering in my chest. I thought something was wrong with my son. But when I looked around, no one was there. The room was still, except for the curtain swaying gently around his bed. I blinked, confused. The voice, it sounded so real. But there were no male nurses on the ward at that time, no visitors. I can still feel the cold that washed over me in that moment. After that, I struggled to fall back asleep. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of it all. The last experience I had happened in the middle of the afternoon. It was about 1 p.m., and the ward was busy, parents and staff moving through the halls. I was heading toward the sluice room to drop off a sample for the nurses. As I got closer, I saw someone dressed in black enter the room. It was clear, solid. At first, I thought it was another parent, so I smiled and started to say hello as I walked toward the door. But when I stepped inside, the room was empty. There was no one there. The only thing that remained was the door, still gently swinging, like someone had just walked in before me. My heart raced again, but there was no one to explain it to. No one to ask what had happened. Now, my son is 5. He's been in remission for a while, and he only has 6 months left of treatment. We've been back to that same ward a few times since, but I haven't experienced anything like that again. Still, I can't help but feel that something is lingering there. Something I can't quite explain. I don't know if I'll ever really understand what happened during those days. I've lived in this house for about 5 or 6 months now, and until recently, nothing too strange had happened. I'd hear some bangs around the house, but I always brushed it off. When my children aren't home, it's easy to blame the neighbors. And when they are home, well, it's often just them playing or making noise in another room. Even when they're in the same room as me, it's easier to ignore those little sounds. But lately, I've had to admit that maybe my peace, free from ghostly visits, was just an illusion. Both myself and my daughters have experienced something that's made me question whether this house is really as quiet as I thought. It all started with my first experience, about a month ago. It was late at night, and I was in bed trying to relax. I'm heavily pregnant, so sleep hasn't been easy. Both of my daughters were fast asleep in their room, and I was just scrolling through my phone, watching true crime videos and messaging friends. I had my back to the bedroom door, and then, out of nowhere, I felt a pressure on the edge of my bed. It wasn't subtle. You know that feeling when someone sits down next to you on a memory foam mattress? You feel the indent, the slight creak of the bed as their weight shifts. At first, I froze. I thought maybe one of the girls had gotten out of bed, but no, I could feel it clearly. The bed was shifting as though someone had just sat down. I tried to ignore it. Not today, I thought. I put my phone down and tried to force myself to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. The next night, the same thing happened again, but this time it was at the bottom of the bed. I felt a light kick, like a child trying to crawl into bed with me. It was so distinct that I knew exactly what it was. My daughter does that when she sneaks into my bed in the middle of the night. But this time, there was no one there. Again, I just told myself to let it go. But this time, the feeling was harder to ignore. Then, a few weeks ago, my eldest daughter, Bonnie, had her experience. Bonnie's 6 now, and for the purpose of this story, I'll call her that. One morning, Bonnie woke up before me and her sister. The house was quiet, and she decided to lay in bed and read for a while. She told me later that she heard someone whispering her name, Bonnie, right in her ear. She was certain it wasn't me or her sister, and while she wasn't scared, she was confused. It didn't seem to bother her much at the time, but I could tell something had unsettled her. A week ago, my youngest daughter, Emily, had her own experience. On Thursdays, it's just me and her at home, since Bonnie's at school. I was in the kitchen doing the dishes, and Emily was talking away to me from the other side of the room. Then, out of nowhere, she suddenly spun around and asked, "Bonnie?" I reminded her that Bonnie was at school, but Emily just stared at me, confused. "But I just saw something crawling," she said, her voice quiet but serious. She wandered off into the front room, and after a few moments, she came running back to me in the kitchen, her eyes wide with fear. She told me that it was in the front room. I asked her what it was, but she couldn't quite explain. She said it was pink. She always describes people as pink. She thinks of Caucasian skin tones that way. She said it was crawling around. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't want to make a big deal of it, hoping it was just her imagination. I didn't want to encourage her, so I just tried to distract her. A little while later, when we were having dinner in the living room, she casually said, "It's gone to the neighbors now." It was scary. The way she said it sent a shiver through me, but I just nodded and tried not to think too much about it. Then, later that evening, after Bonnie had come home from school, Emily did something strange. I was in the kitchen making tea when I looked over and saw her crawling through the dining room in a way that made me freeze for a second. She moved like something out of a horror film, like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. She stood up and looked at me, her eyes full of innocence as she asked, "Did you see it, Mummy?" I said no, again, but she didn't seem to understand. She repeated herself, confused that I couldn't see it. "It was scary," she said, with a shudder. I don't know why, but I asked, "Did it see you?" She looked me straight in the eyes really deep, almost like she was looking through me, and said, "No, he didn't have any eyes." Now, I can't stop picturing this bald, eyeless thing crawling around my house. I don't know what to make of it, but the image haunts me. Since then, Emily keeps reassuring me that it hasn't come back. So, for now, I'm holding on to the hope that whatever she saw is no longer here. Maybe it stayed with the neighbors, as she suggested. As for me, I'm holding on to the idea that the pressure on my bed was just a family member who has passed away, checking on me. And that the whisper Bonnie heard was just a voice keeping her company in the dark. But whatever it is, I hope it stays away. As I sit here, the only light in the room coming from the flickering candle on my sturdy mahogany writing desk, I feel compelled to tell strange encounter I've never quite been able to explain. It was an experience that involved a woman, someone I only came to understand years later. It was just after the New Year's celebrations when my wife's sister was admitted to the local hospital with pneumonia. Her health was poor, but the doctors assured us that, with time, she would recover. Each evening, my wife and I would visit her in the hospital, along with her parents. Her condition had us all on edge, but we stayed hopeful. After visiting the hospital, we would stop by my wife's parents' house on the way home. It was already dark by 5 p.m., so I'd go upstairs to draw the curtains while my wife would do the same downstairs. Her parents usually stayed much later, unwilling to leave their daughter's side in case anything went wrong. One evening, like any other, we made our usual stop at her parents' house. I walked upstairs, crossing the landing and heading to their bedroom. The door was ajar, and as I opened it, something in the atmosphere shifted. I can't quite explain it, but there was a heaviness in the air, an unsettling feeling, yet not an unpleasant one. As I stepped into the room, still bathed in the dim light of early evening, I saw her. A figure, a woman, walked from the shadows near the window on my left and made her way toward the wardrobe on my right. She moved diagonally across the room, her steps slow and deliberate. The woman was larger in size, with hunched shoulders. She was wearing a woolen cardigan over a floral green dress. I couldn't see her face clearly, but there was something about her that felt familiar, though I couldn't place it. I watched her for what must have been 4 or 5 seconds before she simply vanished right before my eyes. My mind didn't immediately process what I'd seen. I stood there for a moment, unsure. I walked into the room and began to draw the curtains, telling myself it must have been a trick of the light. My in-laws' bedroom has 2 windows that look out over the front garden, so I drew the first curtain, the one nearest to where the woman had appeared. As I moved to the second window, the reality of what I just witnessed hit me like a cold wave. I felt a jolt of fear and quickly turned around, half expecting to see the woman standing there behind me. But the room was empty. I turned on the lights, searched the entire house, but there was no sign of her. I didn't say anything to my wife about what I had seen. I simply tried to shake it off. Years passed, and I thought little of that strange moment until one day, when I was at my in-laws' house for Sunday lunch. I walked through the hallway and noticed a table full of family photos. One of the pictures caught my eye. It was a photo of my wife's grandmother, someone I had never met, as she had passed away long before I came into the picture. In the photo, she was older, wearing a floral dress, much like the woman I had seen in the bedroom. There was something familiar about her presence, her posture. She was on the larger side, with hunched shoulders. She looked exactly like the woman I had witnessed in that room 2 years before. That's when it hit me. The woman I had seen was my wife's grandmother. I had never met her while she was alive, but somehow, I had met her after she was gone. Rufus is my older brother, the sensible one. After working hard and saving up, he finally bought his own house, a beautiful detached place in a quiet area. It wasn't an old house, but there was something about it that felt different. Mingus, my other brother, moved in with him, and soon after, they decided to have a housewarming party. I went over to help them set up, organize, and prepare food for the guests. Since I'd be there all day, I decided to leave my things, makeup and party clothes, so I didn't have to go back home with my 2 young kids. I got ready in Rufus' bedroom, a small but cozy space with built-in wardrobes on the back wall. The layout was simple, his bed on the left and not much else, as he had just moved in. As the evening wore on and the party got livelier, my daughter's bedtime approached, so I began to gather my things to leave. But as I walked into the room to collect my stuff, something strange happened. A black item of clothing, which was resting at the end of the bed, suddenly lifted into the air. It was thrown with considerable force, slamming against the wardrobe door on the right side of the room. I froze for a moment, then quickly grabbed my things, walked downstairs, and hurriedly said my goodbyes, eager to get out of there. After the party, I decided to tell Rufus what had happened. He went pale and told me that he never leaves the wardrobe doors open. The same door that the clothing had hit had slammed shut on its own in the early hours of the morning, waking him up. The next few weeks brought more unsettling experiences. Rufus and I were sitting together in his living room when we both clearly heard footsteps walking around upstairs, except there was no one else in the house but us. Then, around Christmas time, Rufus had another experience. He was in his room, which he had renovated by this point to include a work desk, when he heard someone open Mingus's bedroom door and walk down the stairs. At first, he assumed it was Mingus, but then he realized that Mingus was actually at work that day. A couple of weeks ago, I got a message from Rufus while he was watching TV on the sofa downstairs. He was about to go to bed, so he turned off the TV, only for his cat to jump up onto his lap and settle in. Rufus, joking about accepting his fate of staying put, sent me some pictures of the cat lounging contentedly. Then, things took a strange turn. The cat suddenly started staring up at the ceiling, then at Rufus, as if something had caught its attention. It refused to leave his knee, which was odd, but what happened next was even stranger. The cat began desperately trying to escape, scratching at the door to get out. Rufus hesitated, unsure about letting the cat out in the heavy rain and strong winds, but eventually, he relented. The cat bolted outside, heading straight for the porch and sitting there, refusing to come back inside. Rufus shrugged it off and went upstairs, but just as he reached the top of the stairs, he heard a loud crash. The sound echoed through the house, but Rufus couldn't figure out where it had come from. Mingus was fast asleep, so it wasn't him. There was nothing out of place in the house, no sign of anything falling or moving. To this day, the cat still prefers to sit outside, even in the cold and rain, rather than stay inside the house. It all began when I moved into my first house, just a few doors down from my dad's place. It was a small, 2-up, 2-down house with a quaint layout. The stairs led up from the front door to a tiny square landing with 2 doors, one to each of the bedrooms. Not much space, but enough for me and my daughters to make it our own. At first, everything felt normal. It was just me, my partner, and the girls living there. But, as often happens, things didn't work out between us, and he moved out. Despite the change, the house felt calm and homely, at least at first. Nothing out of the ordinary happened that I could recall. I had the bedroom at the back of the house, and my daughters shared the large room at the front. It was plenty of space for me. I had grown up in small rooms, so this felt like an upgrade. However, as the months went by, I began noticing odd things. I'm a bit of a tomboy, and most of my friends are male, mostly the same few: James, my best friend, Ryan, a friend who would crash at my place when he was on leave from the army, and Dan, a regular presence in my life. These friends often stayed over, either when we had early plans the next day or when they needed a place to sleep. And that's when it started. At first, it was subtle, a series of knocks or bangs coming from upstairs. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd expect from a house with children. When it happened, my friends would hear it too, confirming it wasn't just in my head. I remember one time asking James to check it out. The noise sounded like the girls' wardrobe being dragged across the floor, something I knew they couldn't have done. When James came back, he said nothing seemed out of place. One night, when the girls were staying at their granddad's, I was up late getting ready for my eldest's birthday party. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. when I finally went to bed. I couldn't sleep well, so I ended up lying on my daughter's bed for comfort, her headboard next to the landing door. I'd barely drifted off when I was jolted awake by someone banging their feet on the landing right at the top of the stairs. Thinking it was my friend, I went downstairs to ask what was going on. But when I walked into the living room, my friend was still fast asleep on the sofa. I woke him up, and he was just as confused as I was. This kind of thing became a pattern whenever one of my male friends stayed over. The noises always seemed to happen when they were around. The footsteps on the landing, the bangs, it was as if something or someone was watching us. Then came one night that truly left me shaken. I had a few friends over, including Grace, who was staying in my bed with me. Her daughter, who was also 3, was in my daughter's room, and my youngest, who was under a year old, was in a cot next to my bed. It was a hot summer night, and the house was stifling. Grace and I kept going outside to cool off, while James, who didn't seem to mind the heat, was fast asleep on the sofa. We finally tried to sleep, windows wide open to catch a breeze. It must have been around 2 a.m. when we both shot up in bed at the same time. I felt at first a presence, standing just behind the bedroom door, out of sight. I called my daughter's name, thinking she had gotten up, but there was no answer. I called again, nothing. That feeling of fear crept over me, growing stronger with each moment. I called her name once more, but still, no response. Grace whispered that it wasn't her daughter standing there. Whatever it was, whatever had been there, it felt wrong. We just lay there, hand in hand, trying to stay calm. Eventually, we managed to fall back asleep, though I still don't know how we managed it. The next morning, I brought it up to Grace. To my surprise, she remembered everything exactly as I did. She, too, had felt that overwhelming fear. And she hadn't wanted to go back to sleep either. We went downstairs to talk to James. He groggily opened his eyes and confirmed that he hadn't woken up at all during the night. It was a few months later that Halloween rolled around. I went all out, decorating the downstairs with fake cobwebs, red lights, and a spooky playhouse for the kids. The house was buzzing with energy, 5 kids running around and around 14 adults chatting and laughing. But amid the party, we suddenly heard a loud banging coming from upstairs. At first, I assumed it was one of the kids causing trouble, so I went upstairs to check. But both the rooms were empty. The noise had stopped, and we didn't know where it had come from. We sat at the foot of the stairs, just in case someone was sneaking around, but then the banging started again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, like a grumpy old man stomping his foot, annoyed by the noise downstairs. It didn't stop there, though. A few months later, I moved out. I thought maybe leaving would end the oddities, but within days of being in the new house, things started happening again. My 4-year-old daughter refused to go into the dining room because she saw shadow people there. One night, the stairgate opened on its own, something I still can't explain, considering it was a tricky 3-step process to unlock, and the girls were too young to figure it out. Then, one night, I was woken by the loud sound of one of my daughter's toys. Under my bed, the toy train blared, toot toot. I am the #1 steam engine. Needless to say, I had a mild heart attack in the middle of the night. I lived in that first house for 2.5 years, and while there weren't many events, the few that did occur left a lasting impression. Whether it was just my imagination or something more, I'll never know for sure. I've always known there was something off about the back bedroom in my dad's house. I lived there from the time I was a month old until I was in my 20s, and for the most part, it was just me, my dad, and my 2 brothers after my mom and dad split when I was in year 4. That's when things began to change, though, at the time, I had no way of understanding what was happening. The house itself wasn't particularly old, but there were air raid shelter remnants buried in the gardens of the neighbors. That detail always stuck with me, giving the place a strange sense of history, as if the house had seen things it never talked about. Inside, the layout was simple. The stairs split the living room and dining room, and from the landing, you could turn right to reach my dad's room, left to my brother's, and straight ahead through my brother's room to the back bedroom, which became mine. The back bedroom was small, slanted roof, drop-down floor, nothing spectacular, but I always felt watched there, an unease that never fully left me. I tried to tell my dad, but he's a no-nonsense kind of man, so he just brushed it off. "There's nothing wrong with that room, you're just imagining it," he'd say. But the discomfort never went away. It started subtly. I would wake up in the middle of the night with cuts on my chest and arms, strange, shallow ones, stinging like they were fresh. I kept my nails cut short, so I knew I wasn't scratching myself in my sleep. I asked my brothers about it, but they were just as confused as I was. They dismissed it as nothing, just as my dad had. But the cuts kept happening. Then came the butterfly. It shouldn't have been there, and it was a problem for me, because I have an intense fear of butterflies, always have. The windows in the house didn't open, and there was no way this butterfly could have flown in from outside. Yet there it was, fluttering around in the back bedroom. It felt like whatever was in that room was mocking me, taunting me. I refused to sleep in there after that, moving into my dad's bedroom while he moved to the living room. After that, things died down for a while. The room remained closed, and I tried to forget about it. But even when I left that back bedroom behind, I could still feel the presence watching me, especially when I passed the landing and headed into the front bedroom. It was as if the room knew I was there, and it was waiting. Years passed, and I eventually moved out, started a family of my own. I returned to visit my dad often, and that's when things began to stir again. My dad, always working on odd jobs to keep himself busy, decided to make some changes to the house. One of his projects was creating a new corridor that led directly to the back bedroom. With the door to the back room wedged open during renovations, I started to feel that familiar sensation of being watched again, only this time, it felt more intense, like whatever it was had become closer. I tried to talk to my dad about it, but he just dismissed it as nonsense, as usual. Then came the night my daughter, just 2 years old at the time, had an encounter that made my blood run cold. We were going upstairs to put her to bed in the front bedroom when she stopped on the landing. She pointed down the new corridor and started crying, calling out "monster." I tried to comfort her, but she kept pointing, still crying, saying "monster." It was one of the most chilling things I've ever witnessed. It wasn't long after that my dad began renovating my brother's old bedroom into a guest room for my daughters. My girls were excited to have their own space when they stayed over, but the night we decided to let them camp out in the middle room is when I had my most terrifying experience in that house. The back bedroom door was still wedged open, and the door to the new room hadn't been installed yet. I could feel the presence again, creeping, watching me from across the hallway. But I tried to keep my cool for the sake of my girls, who were oblivious to the atmosphere. I knelt down to kiss my youngest goodnight when I felt a sudden force yank me to the ground by the top of my shirt. It was like something grabbed me and pulled me. My heart raced, but I quickly reassured the girls I'd just lost my balance. The whole thing felt so wrong, but I had to act like nothing was out of the ordinary. After that night, I didn't visit as much. The house felt oppressive again, and the pandemic soon kept us all apart. I hadn't set foot in that house for a long time. But months later, I finally mentioned the strange happenings to my mom, who had lived in the house for years before me. She confirmed what I had always suspected. She had felt something, too, and was always scared of the back bedroom. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. For as long as I can remember, our family home has always had its quirks. We've jokingly referred to it as being haunted, but it was mostly harmless, just the occasional creak or unexplained sound here and there. My dad, ever the skeptic, would always brush it off. But recently, something's changed. The strange occurrences have become more frequent, and even my dad has started to notice things he can't explain. The only thing we've done differently in the house recently is update the hallways. For about 16 years, we had the same blue carpet, but last month we replaced it with hardwood floors. Our hallways are long with high ceilings, so when someone walks through, you can hear the distinct sound of footsteps. And lately, all of us have been hearing them. Footsteps. Coming down the hall, but when we go to check, there's nobody there. Sometimes, they stop just before reaching a bedroom door, or somewhere in the middle of the hall. It's strange. We've all heard footsteps before, but now, it's happening more often and more clearly. And what's odd is that the sound seems to echo in both the new and old parts of the house. It makes me wonder, does changing the flooring somehow make the ghosts more active? I mean, it's hard to imagine that spirits are bothered by what's underfoot, but it does seem like a strange coincidence. There's been other things, too. As part of the renovation, we added lights along the skirting boards of the stairs. One morning, I was already at work, and the rest of the family was still asleep. My dad, however, was up early. He was standing in the downstairs hallway when, without warning, one of the lights flew off the wall and crashed on the floor next to him. The stairs have a slight curve, so it's almost impossible for something to fall that way, let alone with the force it did. It was stuck to the wall, and no one had been near it. My dad, who usually brushes things off, was in complete disbelief. Until now, I've been the only one in the family who's seen things get thrown around, usually in my own room. I've watched perfume bottles, candles, and even books fly across the room. But for my dad to experience something like that was unsettling, especially because he's always so oblivious to these things. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And then there's our dog. He's a quiet and calm dog, but recently, his behavior has changed. He's been pacing the hallway, barking and growling at nothing. It started out slow, but now it's become more frequent. He'll sit on a step near the bottom of the stairs and growl at the empty air, like there's something there he can't see. At first, we thought maybe he was just getting used to the new flooring. He tends to slide around on it, making a lot of noise. But it's worse now. He'll stand in the hallway, barking and growling for what feels like hours, staring at nothing. Even weirder, he started running to the living room door late at night, between 2 and 5 a.m., as if he hears one of us coming downstairs. But we're all still in bed. I've been awake a few nights recently, not feeling well, and I've heard him do this running down the hall, frantic, as if there's someone else in the house. One night, I went downstairs to let him out into the garden around 1 a.m. As I walked through the kitchen, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the appliances, like they were being moved, just out of sight. But when I turned around, nothing was there. I can't help but wonder, has something changed in the house? Have we somehow stirred up the spirits by making these small updates? The last time there was major activity was shortly after we added a new section to the house. My brother swears he saw a woman standing in the hallway, shouting at him to get to bed. It's hard to ignore the timing of all these events.
For as long as I can remember, our family home has always had its quirks. We've jokingly referred to it as being haunted, but it was mostly harmless, just the occasional creak or unexplained sound here and there. My dad, ever the skeptic, would always brush it off. But recently, something's changed. The strange occurrences have become more frequent, and even my dad has started to notice things he can't explain. The only thing we've done differently in the house recently is update the hallways. For about 16 years, we had the same blue carpet, but last month we replaced it with hardwood floors. Our hallways are long with high ceilings, so when someone walks through, you can hear the distinct sound of footsteps. And lately, all of us have been hearing them. Footsteps. Coming down the hall, but when we go to check, there's nobody there. Sometimes, they stop just before reaching a bedroom door, or somewhere in the middle of the hall. It's strange. We've all heard footsteps before, but now, it's happening more often and more clearly. And what's odd is that the sound seems to echo in both the new and old parts of the house. It makes me wonder, does changing the flooring somehow make the ghosts more active? I mean, it's hard to imagine that spirits are bothered by what's underfoot, but it does seem like a strange coincidence. There's been other things, too. As part of the renovation, we added lights along the skirting boards of the stairs. One morning, I was already at work, and the rest of the family was still asleep. My dad, however, was up early. He was standing in the downstairs hallway when, without warning, one of the lights flew off the wall and crashed on the floor next to him. The stairs have a slight curve, so it's almost impossible for something to fall that way, let alone with the force it did. It was stuck to the wall, and no one had been near it. My dad, who usually brushes things off, was in complete disbelief. Until now, I've been the only one in the family who's seen things get thrown around, usually in my own room. I've watched perfume bottles, candles, and even books fly across the room. But for my dad to experience something like that was unsettling, especially because he's always so oblivious to these things. And then there's our dog. He's a quiet and calm dog, but recently, his behavior has changed. He's been pacing the hallway, barking and growling at nothing. It started out slow, but now it's become more frequent. He'll sit on a step near the bottom of the stairs and growl at the empty air, like there's something there he can't see. At first, we thought maybe he was just getting used to the new flooring. He tends to slide around on it, making a lot of noise. But it's worse now. He'll stand in the hallway, barking and growling for what feels like hours, staring at nothing. Even weirder, he's started running to the living room door late at night, between 2 and 5 a.m., as if he hears one of us coming downstairs. But we're all still in bed. I've been awake a few nights recently, not feeling well, and I've heard him do this running down the hall, frantic, as if there's someone else in the house. One night, I went downstairs to let him out into the garden around 1 a.m. As I walked through the kitchen, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the appliances, like they were being moved, just out of sight. But when I turned around, nothing was there. The last time there was major activity was shortly after we added a new section to the house. My brother swears he saw a woman standing in the hallway, shouting at him to get to bed. It's hard to ignore the timing of all these events.
Earlier this year, I learned how to tune my own piano. As a pianist, this was something I had always wanted to do, but it wasn't practical to get a professional tuner over this year. We had a leaking pipe that needed urgent attention, and, although it was easy enough to stay safe while the plumber was around, masks, sanitizing, the usual precautions, getting a piano tuned seemed like a different matter entirely. Pianos, unfortunately, can't be sanitized with alcohol, so the idea of having someone come over just wasn't safe at the time. It's not great to leave a piano out of tune for too long, though. The strings and mechanics can suffer, and it can be frustrating to play on an instrument that's off. So, I knew I'd have to learn how to do it myself eventually. Many pianists tune their own pianos in between professional services, though the piano community is a bit divided on whether it's a good idea. Some think it's too risky or difficult, and that's perfectly fine. For me, it just felt like something I'd have to do. I spent a lot of time watching tutorials, gathering the right tools, and reading up on techniques. Eventually, I felt ready to give it a try. Now, a few months into tuning my own piano, I'm surprised by how much I've learned. I've managed to do a few full tunings and a handful of touch-ups, making small adjustments to keep the piano in shape. It's a slow, methodical process, and I'm always careful. But, recently, something strange happened while I was tuning the piano, a moment that still doesn't make sense. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the middle of a full tune. It's a process that takes about 2 hours, and I always make sure to close the lid when I'm done. I've always been obsessive about keeping it closed when the piano isn't in use. It's just a habit, like closing a book when you're done reading. That day, as I lowered the lid, something felt off. At first, everything seemed normal, but then the lid started feeling lighter. It wasn't just lighter, it felt like something inside the piano was cushioning it, as though there were blankets or cushions pressing up against the lid. It was a strange thought to have, but that's what crossed my mind. The lid was lowering easily, as if something was inside, pushing back. Confused, I lifted it again, expecting to find something, but there was nothing there. I stood there for a moment, staring at the piano, trying to make sense of it. What had just happened? It made no sense. I lowered the lid again, and this time, it felt completely normal, no resistance, no strange sensation. I stood there for a few more seconds, replaying the moment in my head. But nothing about it added up. I left the room, still baffled. I couldn't explain it. It was so illogical. And, just to be polite, because if it was a ghost, I figured it deserved some recognition, I opened the door again and said thanks. It felt strange, but I guess, why not? Before that strange moment with the lid, something else had happened that I didn't think much of at the time. While tuning one of the lower treble notes, I started to hear a faint buzzing sound. It was static, barely audible, but it was there. The sound was present for the entire time I worked on that note, which was a semitone. At first, I assumed it was the rubber mute vibrating. So, I adjusted it, but the static continued. I didn't think too much of it. I'm pretty focused when I'm tuning, so I kept going. But when I finished tuning that note and removed the mutes, the static was still there. That's when I started paying closer attention. I tried everything to stop it. The hammer wasn't sticking, the mute wasn't vibrating. Nothing seemed to explain the sound. It was frustrating. Then, on a hunch, I played a quick improvisation using that same note, and, almost immediately, the static stopped. Just like that. It hasn't happened since. I'll be curious to hear what my tuner says when he comes by. Maybe he'll have a logical explanation for the buzzing sound, or maybe he'll ask me the questions that will make me feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't know. From my experience, I've never encountered anything that could cause all three strings to rattle like that on a single note. Usually, it's just one string, but all three? I don't know what to make of it. It's not the first time I've heard that kind of static, though. I've heard it through my headphones or speakers a few times, but never like this, coming directly from the piano. It was a first for me. The lid incident still nags at me. Pianos are heavy, especially with solid hardwood like mine, and for it to feel like it lost half its weight when I lowered it was strange. I honestly don't know why my first thought was that something would be inside the piano. But I was so sure it had to be something inside until I opened the lid again and found nothing. I kept thinking about it after the fact. A few months ago, I watched a video on YouTube about a soft close hinge mechanism for grand piano lids. It showed a lid falling, but the hinge caught the weight and slowed its descent. It looked almost supernatural to me. I watched the video a few times, fascinated by the mechanism. Now, I can't help but wonder if someone was inspired by that. It's almost too coincidental. I've heard of soft close fallboards, but a soft close lid? That's something new to me. It's impressive, but also a little unsettling. I can't help but wonder, has my tuner ever experienced anything like this? He brings all this high-tech equipment with him, including a frequency meter. Maybe it'll pick something up, or maybe it'll just be one of those odd stories that no one can explain. For now, I'm left wondering about the connection between the strange static and the eerie sensation with the lid. I don't have all the answers yet. I'm hoping the tuner might help clear things up, but part of me isn't sure if I want to know. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. These two stories were told to me many years ago by my aunt. Both stories take place in the same house, located in Uphall, West Lothian, in an area known as Millbank. This would have been back in the late 50s to early 60s. The house sat near the Broxburn, a stream that runs through the villages of Uphall and Broxburn. It's an area rich in history, and even the names have stories of their own. Brox, for example, is a Scots word for badger, and the burn was named after it. Close to the burn is an old watermill, now a house, where grain was ground in days gone by. There's a bridge near the mill, called Miller's Brig, and just beside it, the houses of Millbank stretch along. One day, my aunt was hanging the washing outside when she heard a strange, distant chatter. At first, she wasn't sure what it was, but as she listened more closely, she could make out voices discussing prices and haggling over items. Curious, she moved closer to the burn, trying to get a better view of who could be making all this noise. But when she peered down the steep bank, what she saw stopped her in her tracks. The scene was unlike anything she had expected. Below, where the burn ran past the bridge, there were market stalls. Men in tricorn hats, long coats, and pantaloons were walking along a sidewalk that ran parallel to the burn, stretching both westwards under Miller's Brig and eastwards along the stream. The air was thick with activity. Women in long, flowing dresses and bonnets were selling fruit, vegetables, meats, and poultry. My aunt could even see a set of stone steps, leading from Station Road down to the market area. She stood there, transfixed, for what must have been 5 to 10 minutes, watching the strange scene unfold. It was as though time had shifted, she was witnessing something from another era. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the market scene faded away, and the area returned to its overgrown, quiet state. She never saw anything like it again. The other story, however, was much darker. My uncle worked as a long-distance lorry driver and was often away for weeks at a time. My aunt had 3 young children, my cousins, all under 10 years old. One night, she was in bed when she heard footsteps downstairs. At first, she didn't think much of it, it was probably one of the girls getting up for a drink of water. But then, she realized something wasn't right. She hadn't heard any movement from their room, and these footsteps didn't sound like a child's light step. They were heavy, thudding on the floor, as though someone was walking with purpose on tiled floors. But that didn't make sense. The downstairs had recently been carpeted. The sound of the footsteps continued, moving up the stairs. But this time, they seemed to shift to wooden steps. The house had been carpeted throughout, so there shouldn't have been any noise like that. The footsteps seemed to go down the hall, passing her room, and then they paused for a moment, right outside her door. She could see a shadow creeping under the door. She thought, perhaps, my uncle had returned home early and was just checking on the kids. But then, the footsteps resumed. They moved down the hall, where she heard the linen cupboard door open and then close. The house went silent again. Confused, she got up to investigate. She first checked the girls' room, both were sound asleep, no sign of anyone coming in. She checked on my male cousin, who was also asleep in his room. There was no sign of my uncle. She checked the downstairs, but all the windows and doors were locked tight, with no sign of forced entry. The next day, she mentioned the strange events to a neighbor who had lived nearby for many years. This elderly lady had grown up in the house and was familiar with its history. She told my aunt that, years before, the man who had lived there was known for his cruelty toward his children. He had been accused of locking them in the linen cupboard as a form of punishment, sometimes for hours on end. The man had been a miner, working during the shale mining boom that took place in the region during the 1800s and early 1900s. The heavy footsteps my aunt had heard all night long, it seemed, were those of the man who had once walked the floors in heavy work boots, possibly as he carried out his cruel punishments. The neighbor went on to tell my aunt that, when she was a child, she too had heard these footsteps. But over the years, she had come to see them as a residual haunting, not something malevolent. She had come to believe the footsteps were just echoes of the past, imprints left behind by someone who had long since passed. I volunteered at a small nursery for about 6 months before it closed down. It was a quaint place, with only 7 children, which made it feel personal and calm at first. But as time passed, things started to get strange. The layout of the place was simple: a main hall, a small walkway leading to the kitchen, and a closed-off area that led to a storage room. The hall was also used as a social club, and the chairs were kept stacked in an old bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was enough for us to carry on. The door we used to take the children out was odd. There was a curtain that covered what I assumed was a massive sink, though I wondered if it was a bath instead. I never felt quite right about it, but I didn't think much of it at the time. But the experiences, well, they started small. In the kitchen, I began to feel like someone was always watching me. I'd be washing up, and it felt as though eyes were fixed on my back, though I could never see anyone. One day, I walked into the open cupboard door. I was certain it had been shut. It felt strange, like something had made it open when I wasn't looking. Other cupboards and drawers would do the same thing, open and shut on their own. Eventually, I started making mental notes, keeping track of what was shut so I could tell if something had moved by itself. Then, one day, I walked out of the kitchen, and the other staff were talking about ghosts. Naturally, I was curious, so I asked them about it. They told me that the owners of the hall had heard footsteps echoing in the hall after everyone had gone home. The owners had checked the building each time, but it was always empty. It left us all a bit unnerved, but we told ourselves it could have been anything: old pipes, maybe, or the sound of the building settling. Still, something lingered in the air. And before long, the staff started leaving me alone in the nursery, as we each had different jobs to do. I'd finish up the washing and sit alone in the hall, waiting to be picked up. That's when the sounds started. At first, they were quiet, distant thumps, soft footsteps, clunks that seemed to echo from the hall. I kept telling myself it was the bar next door, that it was just people moving around or things shifting. But it didn't stop. The sounds kept coming, and the more I heard them, the harder it became to ignore. One evening, I brought a broom with me as a sort of defense, just in case. I couldn't help it. I'd sit there, watching YouTube videos to distract myself, hoping it would help drown out the noise. It didn't. And sometimes, when I went to the toilet, the beanbags in the corner would be moved. I couldn't figure out how. I was alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was messing with me. Eventually, the staff changed, and I wasn't left alone in the nursery anymore. Around that time, we started looking after a baby. He would sleep in the storage room, with a monitor in place so we could hear him. And that's when things got even stranger. Sometimes, we'd hear strange noises through the monitor, scratching sounds, shuffling, things that didn't sound like a baby. The manager always insisted it was just the baby making those noises in his sleep, but it didn't always make sense. And his dummy, well, that would always go missing. It was strange. We'd find it in odd places, under the cot, under the mattress, as though it had been moved somewhere else when no one was around. One day, the door to the storage room opened by itself. It wasn't just a draft, it swung open slowly and then closed just as quietly. The oldest child was with me at the time. We both looked at each other, and she went to tell the manager. But the manager just shrugged it off, saying it was the wind. When I was about 17, I was living with my foster family. My foster dad had gone to Russia, and his daughter, Trish, was looking after the family. One weekend, someone suggested we go camping, so we packed up and drove to a place near a village called Tyso. It was a disused WW2 airfield, with a large wooded area on one side. Someone mentioned it was near the site of the Battle of Edgehill, which had taken place during the Civil War. My foster sister, Jenny, and I decided to explore the woods. We stumbled across what looked like an abandoned camp, wood bent into the shape of a hut, with a chair inside and a burnt-out fire pit outside. What was even stranger were the symbols made of sticks, hanging eerily around the area. It felt bizarre, like we were intruding on something we shouldn't have been near. That night, as we all settled into our tents, we began to hear voices. Not ours, other voices, talking quietly. When we ventured out to investigate, we saw what appeared to be silhouettes of people standing motionless in the woods, murmuring together in a way that felt almost menacing. We couldn't see any faces, just shadows, but the atmosphere was thick with dread. Everyone was terrified, and we packed up our things in a panic, leaving behind half our gear. On the drive back, no one wanted to sleep alone, so we all huddled together in the front room of the house, uneasy and shaken. Years later, I moved back to Leamington and shared a house with a female friend. One night, my ex and I were asleep when I was suddenly woken up by the sound of the front door. The dog, who was usually calm, went crazy, barking and growling. I knew it couldn't have been my housemate, as she was out for the night. Something about the situation made me feel like I needed to run and lock the bedroom door. I could hear something outside, knocking over boxes in the hallway, and the dog was still going mad. My ex grabbed a metal vacuum pole and opened the door, but there was no one there. The dog continued barking and growling, staring at a corner of the living room where nothing was visible. We checked the whole house, but everything was locked. We couldn't explain it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with that place. The house had a strange, uncomfortable vibe, and after that night, I hated being there alone. More odd things happened, but nothing we could put our finger on. A few months later, I was working at a care home and was talking to a lady about her wedding. She told me that the morning of her wedding, she was overjoyed to leave her parents' house, because it was haunted. She'd never returned to it after her marriage. Curious, I asked where it was, and she told me it was on Russell Terrace. My heart skipped a beat. I lived on Russell Terrace. It turned out that the house I was living in had once been hers. The apartment I lived in was a converted part of the original house. The corner where the dog had been barking right by the old door was now part of the living room, but there had once been a doorway there leading into the hall. When I got home, I moved the sofa and noticed something odd: the skirting boards didn't match. I pulled them back and saw that a door had been bricked up and sealed. Then, the lady told me something that made my blood run cold. Before her parents had lived there, someone with an interest in Satanism had owned the house. She said this person was connected to Aleister Crowley, who had roots in Leamington Spa. She also told me that her parents had sealed off the basement due to strange events that had occurred there. I had no idea the house even had a basement, but when I went outside, I noticed small metal grates near the ground, and signs that the basement windows had been bricked up. The landlord later confirmed that the basement had been flooded for years, due to the high water table from the nearby river, causing rising damp and structural damage. The whole thing gave me a sinking feeling. We ended up moving out soon after, but I always wondered if whatever haunted the house had stayed there. The basement was never restored, even though it could have been turned into additional flats for the property. Instead, it was kept sealed, just left as it was. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I first started working in care, I didn't know what I was getting into. Looking back, the first home I worked in was one of the most eerie places I've ever been. It wasn't just the building, though, trust me, that played a big part. It was the residents, the atmosphere, and the strange things that happened on a regular basis. I was 17 at the time, and I had no idea what to expect. I went in for my interview, and a lady walked into the nurse's station and gave me a stern telling off for being late. I didn't know her at all, but she handed me a brownie wrapped in tissue, which I assumed was just part of a friendly gesture from the staff. It turned out, though, that the brownie wasn't really a brownie at all. And the lady wasn't staff either. She was a resident, a former pub landlady. At some stage of her dementia, she must have mistaken me for bar staff, late for my shift. I got the job in the care home. The interview had been straightforward enough, though a bit strange. The manager asked why I wanted to work in care, and I told her about my experience with Macmillan nurses looking after my mom. I also quickly added that I wasn't cut out for nursing, definitely not interested in catheters, thanks very much. On my first day, I walked into the home and saw a lady in the corner of the room, doing high kicks and singing the can-can. Yes, the can-can. She was full of energy, dancing in the corner like no one's business. I was told to watch the conservatory, which was basically a big room where everyone had to come and sit. And when I say sit, I mean sit. It didn't matter whether you wanted to or not. You just had to sit there and be watched. Days went by, and I started to ask if I could do more. I wanted to interact with the residents, help them with things. I was told that today was Balloons and Feather Bowers, a game where we'd place feather boas on the residents and knock a balloon around. It didn't sound like much, but it was a routine, and the lady who had been doing the can-can was top-notch at kicking the balloon around. As time passed, I grew more comfortable and started helping the residents get ready for the day. I remember one time, I was told off because I took too long helping a lady named Doreen. I'd put her hair in rollers and matched her outfit with care. Apparently, that was considered too much, but Doreen was a queen, and she deserved the best. Then came Gordon. He was an elderly man who had no family left, and he was known for being cantankerous, but with me, he softened. I called him Granddad, and it made him laugh every time. He became ill, and I would visit him even on my days off. One night, I came to see him, and when I entered his room, his bed was empty. I rushed out into the corridor, scanning the area for him, afraid he'd fallen down the stairs. I turned a corner, and there he was at the end of the hallway, just standing there. When I rushed to catch up with him, though, he vanished. Gone. I searched the rooms, ran downstairs to check, but Gordon was nowhere to be found. I went to the nurse on duty, only to learn that Gordon had passed away hours earlier. It wasn't just Gordon. A few weeks later, a lady named Eileen, who was nearing the end of her life, was in a similar state. She'd spend her time rubbing her hands together, making soft clicking noises with her tongue. One morning, my colleague went into work and saw Eileen standing at the top of the stairs, looking well. She immediately went to warn the nurse about the risk of her falling, only to be told that Eileen had passed away the night before. It made my skin crawl. After I left that home, I moved to work for a larger care provider. One home had a dementia suite on the ground floor, with wooden handrails lining the corridors. There was a resident, an elderly gentleman, who would hook his walking stick on the rails and shuffle down to room 21, where he believed his wife was waiting. This lady, who was bedridden, would often be locked in the room with him. After he passed away suddenly, we would still hear the sound of his walking stick banging on the handrails in the hallway. And whenever we checked, his wife's door was locked, just like he used to do. The sensors would often go off even when she was still in bed and sleeping. Eventually, it stopped, and I like to think he finally realized where he was and that she wasn't his wife after all. But the eeriest experience came when I worked at a new build care home in Bromsgrove. The home was still being set up, and I was working on the second floor. The whole place was equipped with secure keypads, ensuring residents with dementia couldn't access the stairwells. One day, as I looked down the corridor, I saw a young girl running toward me. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, and I rushed to catch up with her, worried she had somehow gotten up there alone. But when I checked every room and the stairwell, she was gone. I spoke to the site manager about it, and he casually told me that builders had seen the same thing for months. The home was built on the site of a former children's home, and they'd all seen the girl too. A few months later, I learned something unsettling. The dementia suite was on the ground floor, and one resident, a woman, would often become upset at night, insisting that black children were keeping her awake. At first, we all wrote it off as part of her hallucinations, but something about it fell off. One day, I asked her more about it, and she told me that a black child would wake her up at night. It wasn't until much later that I found out the history of the building. A new resident, who had worked in the old children's home, told me that there had been a room specifically for black children. And the room where the woman had stayed was exactly where that old room had been. I must have been around 5 or 6 when my parents took my sister and me to a teddy bear's picnic at Little Coat House. I remember it being a very special day because my mom let me bring my yellow teddy. My nanny had bought it for me on the day I was born, and it was never allowed off Mom's bed. So, having it with me at this picnic felt like a big deal. I don't remember much about the actual picnic itself. There was probably food, maybe some games, but what I do remember clearly is going inside Little Coat House. The house was eerie even back then, with a strange, old-fashioned atmosphere. There were mannequins dressed in costumes from the past, scattered around the rooms. But it was one room in particular that I can still picture so vividly. We went upstairs into a wooden paneled room, and that's when I noticed her. She was an older woman, probably in her 50s or 60s, wearing a white hair covering and a dirty apron. The apron was stained red, like someone had rubbed their hands on it, and it looked out of place against the other visitors who were all dressed in modern clothes. At first, I thought she was just another mannequin, but then she actually moved toward me. She asked me if I knew about the baby that had been burned on the fire, and whether I knew about the secret passage hidden behind the paneling. I was a very shy child, hard of hearing too, so I mostly spoke through my mom, but I heard her perfectly, which felt strange in itself. What she said terrified me. I could feel my heart racing, and I instinctively turned and walked away, going back to my mom, trying to escape her. But the woman didn't follow. Instead, I looked back, and she was gone. Disappeared without a trace. Her eyes, they were the most unsettling part. They were completely dull, lifeless, no shine, like someone had forgotten to put life into them. I quickly told my mom what had happened, motioning toward where the woman had stood, but when I looked again, there was no sign of her. Mom asked me how I knew what the woman had said, but I just kept repeating that the lady in the costume had told me. Apparently, there was no one like that there that day, and no one else had seen her. But I couldn't forget her, and I don't think my mum could either. What really shook my mum up was when we were shown the secret panel in the wall, what they called a priest hole. At the time, I had no idea what it was, but somehow, I had known about it before anyone had mentioned it. It made my mum question how I knew about the secret passageway before we even saw it. Fast forward a few years, after my mum had passed away, my dad started dating a woman named Simone. I didn't like her. Actually, I really hated her. She wasn't a nice person, and she never hid the fact that she didn't like me either. I used to draw pictures of flying gherkins and write little things like Gherkin Queen, a nickname I'd given her because her real name was Gertrude, but I could never get the name right. One night, I had a vivid and horrible dream. In this dream, we were driving in a small red car, my dad, Simone, my sister, and me. Something went wrong with the tires, and the car flipped over on the motorway. I woke up from the dream feeling shaken, like I'd just witnessed something awful. The next morning, Dad told me Simone was coming to pick us up, and we were going somewhere. Sure enough, she arrived in a red car exactly like the one I dreamed about. It wasn't a car I'd ever seen before. I felt sick as soon as I got in. But what really freaked me out were these little metal hand exercisers on the back seat, exactly like in my dream. I started to panic, feeling like something terrible was going to happen, and I threw one of the exercisers at Simone, desperate to stop the trip. When we finally stopped at a supermarket, I was so upset that I ended up in the shopping trolley seat, and they made me stay there. I just knew something bad was going to happen if we got back in that car, and I couldn't calm down. To try to get back at Simone for her cruel treatment, I loudly pointed at a row of gherkin jars on the supermarket shelf and said, "Is that what you're looking for?" That, of course, made her furious. But it wasn't until later, when we were on our way home, that my sister, Tara, told me something that made my stomach drop. We were supposed to go back to Little Coat House today. I didn't care that I had spoiled the day. I had no desire to return to that freaky house. I was convinced something terrible would happen if we did. When we arrived home, Dad carried me inside and said something that made my blood run cold. As he was getting me out of the car, he glanced at the tires and said, "It's a good job you didn't go on the motorway with that." It was only then that I remembered the dream, the car flipping over on the motorway, and I suddenly felt like I had somehow known that something was going to happen. I had known, even before it was happening. That night, I called my nanny, who was very sensitive to things like spirit and the paranormal. She didn't bat an eyelid when I told her about what had happened. She was used to this kind of thing. A few years later, I was living with my auntie, and I happened to be watching an episode of Strange But True. The episode featured something that made my blood run cold. It was about Little Coat House and its haunted history, particularly a story about a woman who had died there, and how her spirit had been seen in the house, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, just like the woman I had seen. I can't explain it, but after that, it all felt like some twisted loop I had somehow entered. The house, the dreams, the things I saw, all of it just didn't sit right. Maybe I had seen something I shouldn't have. Maybe the house itself had known my fear, my premonitions. But one thing I know for sure is that I'll never forget that woman at Little Coat House. The one with the dull eyes and the red-stained apron. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.
On Wednesday, September 16, 2020, I set off for a wild camping trip in the Galloway Forest Park in southwest Scotland. If you've ever been to this part of the country, you'll know it's a truly magical place, particularly because it's one of the few dark skies areas. On clear nights, the views above are breathtaking. You can actually see the Milky Way in all its glory. But this story isn't about the stars above, it's about something far more grounded, something I experienced right here on Earth. I'd been to Loch Doon a few times before, and decided to head there again to test out some new camping gear. I arrived around 5 p.m, found a perfect spot by the water's edge at the southern end of the loch, where the Carrick Lane flows in. After setting up camp, including a nice little fire and a natural pit, I spent some time relaxing, watching the sun go down. By 9 p.m., I was ready to hit the hay, so I crawled into my tent, feeling content and eager to get some rest. But what happened next? Well, it's something I'll never forget. I fell into a deep sleep, but it wasn't long before I was abruptly awakened. I checked the time on my phone, 22:47. The rummaging sounds I heard outside the tent didn't seem unusual at first. Maybe it was deer, or perhaps amphibians, since the area around my tent was quite marshy. I brushed it off and went back to sleep. But as I drifted back into slumber, I began to realize something was wrong. My sleeping position was off. I'd somehow shifted, and my head had slipped off my pillow, pointing towards the top of my sleeping pad. As I lay there, still half asleep, I suddenly felt a hand grip my shoulder. It wasn't tight, but just enough to make me aware of it. It didn't feel like an arm or hand that belonged to someone alive. It felt more like an awareness, like a presence, trying to get my attention. What happened next is something that still puzzles me. The hand began to shake me, gently at first, but then more violently. My body, including my head, rocked back and forth, to the point where I felt like I was almost being lifted off the sleeping pad. It wasn't painful, but it was unnerving. I wasn't sure whether I should open my eyes, but I didn't. Instead, I instinctively reached up and repositioned my head onto the pillow. The shaking stopped the second my head was back on the pillow. I lay there, eyes still closed, for maybe 15 or 20 seconds. In that time, I felt a presence, but it wasn't malevolent or sinister. I wasn't frightened. I felt protected, strangely. As if something or someone was looking out for me. Then, I heard a rustling sound, like someone brushing against the side of my tent, and the tarp fluttered as though something had just passed by. It wasn't wind, because it was localized to that one area behind me, where the hand had come from. At that point, I didn't feel compelled to open my eyes. I just drifted back into a deep, peaceful sleep. The next time I woke up, it was around 6 a.m. The sun was just starting to rise, and I packed up my camp, heading off around 7 a.m. But the experience stayed with me throughout the morning, and I kept thinking about it, trying to make sense of it. Here's what I believe happened. I think the hand, or whatever that presence was trying to keep me safe. I had been in an awkward sleeping position, with my head at an angle that likely restricted my airways. I truly believe that whatever the spirit or presence was, it recognized the danger I was in and physically shook me to wake me up. It wasn't a violent shaking, it was just enough to make me shift positions, freeing my airways and preventing me from potentially choking in my sleep. In some strange way, I think this spirit stayed with me for a moment longer, just to be sure I wasn't going to slip back into that unsafe position again. Now, I know some people may say I was just half asleep, or that I was dreaming, but I can assure you, it wasn't sleep paralysis. I was fully aware of my surroundings, and I know what it feels like to be in that limbo state between sleep and wakefulness. It wasn't frightening, it wasn't uncomfortable, I was calm throughout. It was almost as if I was being looked after in a way that I can't fully explain. And while I'll never know for sure what happened that night, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for whatever it was that helped me. It wasn't a traditional ghost story, but it certainly felt like I had an unseen guardian for a brief moment in time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
When my family lived at number 11, we were no strangers to the paranormal. From the moment we moved in, there was a palpable dark energy in the house. It felt as though something was always there, watching, waiting. And while we were all aware of the spirits that seemed to linger in every shadow, we still managed to live our lives, adjusting to the strange occurrences that happened around us. But what happened with my brother was something far more terrifying, and it wasn't the only time this thing made its presence known. It started with my older brother, whose bedroom was right next to mine. Over time, he began to get more and more agitated, tired, restless, and on edge. At first, he didn't say anything about what was bothering him, but as the days went on, he started to confide in me. He told me that every night, he would see a strange man standing in his room, watching him. He described this man as enormous, with long, dark hair and a long coat. But it wasn't just his size that terrified my brother, it was the blood. The man was covered in blood, with slashes all over his face and hands. My brother said the blood was fresh, still dripping, and he could see the angry, bulging eyes of the man, staring at him from the darkness. The worst part? The man didn't say anything. He just stood there, bleeding, watching my brother. At first, my brother thought he was losing his mind. He never believed in ghosts, but this wasn't just a bad dream. He was wide awake when he saw the man. And the more he saw him, the more disturbed he became. I was petrified. I had never seen anything like this, and the thought of the man appearing in my own room terrified me. But it wasn't just my brother. Over the years, several other people who stayed in our house began to see the same figure. My mother was the first to speak up. She told me she would wake up at night and see the bleeding man sitting at the foot of her bed, staring at her feet. And my other brother, he didn't live with us but stayed over often, started having similar experiences. He woke up to the man poking him in the chest and sides, prodding him with what seemed like a demonic intent. But the strangest part of all of this was that my younger sister and I never saw the bleeding man. We never experienced anything like what the others had described. This left me wondering, why was it that only certain people were seeing him? What made them different from the rest of us? As the years passed and I thought about the encounters more, a chilling realization struck me. All of the people who had seen the bleeding man, my brothers, my mother, and the few other guests, turned out to be people with dark secrets. They had done terrible things that, at the time, no one else knew about. Things that were hidden, buried deep. As I pieced everything together, I couldn't help but wonder if the bleeding man wasn't a malevolent force after all. What if he wasn't here to harm them, but to make them confront their past? What if he was showing himself only to those who had something to atone for? Maybe the bleeding man wasn't a demon at all. Maybe he was more like a spectral judge, revealing himself only to those who had wronged others or lived with guilt. It was as though he was trying to force them to face their demons, both literal and figurative. I'll never know for sure what the bleeding man truly was, but in the years since, I've come to believe that he wasn't a spirit of evil. He wasn't a haunting to be afraid of. Maybe he was just trying to make the bad people see their wrongs and change before it was too late. When I was 8 years old, I first started believing there was a ghost at my infant school. It was a long time ago, but I still remember the feeling of winter, when the days got dark so quickly. Rumors spread around my school, especially in my club, that just across from our playground, in an old house, there had been a murderer. Everyone called him the Man in Black, and they said he wasn't even human. I was only 8, and I believed every word the older kids told me. I found it thrilling, in a way. I loved hearing their stories about the Man in Black. One afternoon, while we were all looking out the window, something strange happened. The sensor light by that house, the one we all thought was haunted, suddenly turned on. We all stared at it, but no one was around. It was unsettling. A few of us, too scared to be alone, rushed to the camera we called the videophone to see if we could spot anyone. I stayed by the window, my eyes fixed on the darkening sky. Then, I heard a soft tapping sound on the window. But when I looked, there was no one there. For a split second, I saw a shadow zip past me. It was too fast for me to understand what it was. I was startled. My heart raced, and I quickly ran to find someone I trusted, someone who knew about this kind of thing. It was a kid from my year, and he believed me right away. A year later, I found myself in my math class, talking to a friend about all the strange things that had happened at school. We both thought the school was haunted, but no one else believed us. So, we decided to conduct a test, determined to prove there was a ghost. We tried everything, but nothing happened. We were frustrated, unsure if we were imagining things. Then, one day, I was alone in the school library when I saw it again. That same shadowy figure, moving past me so quickly. My heart skipped a beat. I was terrified, but I called out, "Hello?" There was nothing. Just silence. Then, I heard something, a child's laughter. It sounded like a young girl, maybe 6 years old. The laughter echoed in the empty library. I froze, too scared to move. In a panic, I ran out of the room and didn't tell anyone what had happened. The last time I saw the shadow was on my final day at that school. I was walking down the hallway, getting ready to leave for good, when I saw it again, the same dark figure. I froze, fear creeping up on me. Was it back to haunt me one last time? But as I looked up, I realized it wasn't the shadow at all. It was just my boyfriend. I felt silly for a moment, but then, I heard it, a soft, haunting melody, almost like singing. I asked him, "Do you hear that?" He looked at me, confused. No. I tried to shake it off, but something about it unsettled me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Since then, I've heard and seen the shadow a few more times. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm losing my mind. Now, in high school, I still feel it sometimes. Every time I sit down in my homeroom, I hear something strange, a soft breathing, like someone else is in the room with me. It's odd because I go to an all-girls school. Out of all the ghostly encounters I'd had, this one still scares me the most. I don't know why it won't leave me alone. Maybe it's a warning, or maybe I'm just haunted by my own fears. We've lived in this house for about 20 years, pretty much my entire life. It's an old house, built in the 1940s, right after our town was destroyed in the war. Before it was rebuilt, there were already foundations from a previous home on the same land. So, it's possible that something has attached itself to the house, or maybe to the land itself. Over the years, we've had several strange experiences. It started with footsteps in the upstairs bedrooms, footsteps that seemed to come from areas where no one could walk anymore, thanks to built-in furniture like wardrobes and window seats. There were things being thrown from shelves, objects that seemed to lift up a few inches before being dropped with force. At first, we tried to explain it away, chalking it up to clumsy accidents or the wind, but as time went on, it became harder to find logical explanations. I'll never forget the time I saw a perfume bottle separate from its lid mid-air, both pieces flying off in opposite directions. Or when books were swiped off a shelf and flew across the room, landing several meters away. It wasn't violent, just strange. But still, it was hard to ignore. Over time, we realized that whatever was happening, it was never harmful. But there's one event that still sticks with me, something that's really hard to explain, and it involves my younger siblings. When my brother was little, he woke up one morning and told us that, during the night, he got out of bed and came downstairs. He said a lady yelled at him, telling him to go back to his room. My sister, several years later, told us the exact same thing, she had seen the same woman. Both of them were around 2 or 3 years old when this happened, and it only happened once to each of them. We tried to explain it away, thinking maybe they had both dreamed it. But the odd thing was, they both described the woman in nearly identical ways. And by the time my sister spoke about the blue lady, my brother had completely forgotten the whole incident, which made it hard for him to have influenced her memory. They both say they saw this woman in the newer part of the house, the area we built in 2006. That part of the house has always made me feel uneasy, even though it's the newest. Before we built there, it was just an empty patch of land with a single blossom tree. Now, it's home to the rooms where I've spent most of my life, yet I can't shake the feeling that something still lingers there. For a few years, things were quieter. The only odd event I can recall in recent times was the books flying off the shelf across my room, but that was months ago. Then, just a few mornings ago, my mom had something happen that really shook us all. She was awake early, scrolling through her phone like usual, when she thought she heard my sister coming down the hall. My sister always asks my mom to do her hair in the mornings, even though she's old enough to do it herself. That particular morning, my mom wasn't in the mood, so she pretended to be asleep, hoping my sister would figure it out. After a moment, she heard a voice call out, "Mum! Mum! Mummy!" My mom stayed still, thinking it was just my sister. But then, a few minutes passed, and she still hadn't felt my sister tap her shoulder or climb into bed like she usually did. Finally, she opened her eyes, and there was no one in the room. My sister wasn't there at all. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. My parents' bedroom is directly above the room where my siblings had the encounter with the lady. Both of them described the woman as being very old, but my mom heard a child's voice calling her name. It's strange. There doesn't seem to be any real pattern to what happens here. The footsteps are the most frequent, but the voice was the first real, concrete event in a while. It's unsettling because it's one of the few things that feels personal. Whoever or whatever is in this house knows us. At this point, we've all gotten used to the oddities. None of it's ever been malicious, just a little unsettling. But that voice, calling out to my mom, addressing her by name, left us all a little rattled. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was growing up, my father was an Anglican vicar, and we lived in a typical vicarage. It was the early 1960s, and clergy houses at the time were always large, old, and full of character, quirky, difficult to heat, and sometimes inconvenient, but always fascinating. Our vicarage, though, was a bit of an exception in some ways. It wasn't beautiful by most people's standards, but to me, it had a certain charm. It's still there, though it's no longer a vicarage. I remember thinking it was an incredibly old house, though my dad would always say it was only 60 years old. Built from red brick in the late Victorian or early Edwardian style, it stood on a huge garden, surrounded by trees, in a quiet lane that led into the woods. There were only a handful of houses on the lane, and a small park opposite. The garden was the perfect place for playing, making dens with friends, climbing trees, hiding from my parents. I loved it. The house, too, had its own unique qualities. All the main downstairs rooms and all the bedrooms, except mine, still had these old push-buttons for electric bells that would ring in the kitchen, left over from the days when there had been a housekeeper and a maid. Above the kitchen door was a panel with little markers to show which room the bell had come from. The kitchen itself was our most used room, where we ate, where we played, where we spent most of our time. It had a big coal fire, a slow-ticking clock, a cat curled up by the hearth, and my toys scattered around. It was warm and cozy, a true family space. Except, of course, when the bells rang from an empty room. I'd be sitting there, drawing, reading, or chatting with my grandma, while Mom was in the kitchen area and my sister away at boarding school. My dad would be out, and then, out of nowhere, a bell would ring. The little marker would point to the dining room or the study rooms I knew were completely empty at the time. I don't remember it happening at any specific time of day or more frequently from one room than another, but I do remember it happening often enough that I couldn't ignore it. At first, it terrified me. I remember being skeptical, even as a child. Yeah, right, I thought, but I played along, pretending to believe them. Over time, though, I got used to it. The ringing bells became just one of the quirks of the house. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease whenever I went into the rooms that rang on their own. What if something was in there? Then, when I was about 7, something happened that I could never explain. I was doing my piano practice in the lounge. The room was large, with a big bay window that made it one of the brightest rooms in the house. I sat at the piano with the window slightly behind me to my right, and to my left was the door to the hall, with a heavy velvet curtain over it. I could see the curtain in my peripheral vision while I practiced my scales, though I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have been. It was then that I saw it. Slowly, the door began to open. I heard my name called twice, softly, as though someone was trying to get my attention. I turned fully to look, and there, just as I turned, I glimpsed the head of someone with white hair disappearing quickly behind the door, as if they'd just peeked in and called my name. I thought it was my grandma, so I called out, "Yes, Nana?" But there was no answer. I got off the piano stool and went to the door, expecting to find her in the hall, but she wasn't there. I looked toward the stairs to see if she was heading up, but there was no sign of her. I thought maybe she had gone back down the hall to the kitchen, but I was surprised. The hall was long, and she was in her 80s. She didn't move very fast. So, I made my way to the kitchen, wondering what she needed. When I got there, she was sitting in her armchair by the fire, talking to Mum. Mum asked why I'd stopped practicing so soon. I told her that Nana had called my name and peeped around the door just a minute ago. Mum looked at me, puzzled, and said that Nana had been sitting in the kitchen the whole time I was at the piano. She hadn't moved. There was no one else in the house, and the only person with white hair was my grandma, who hadn't left the kitchen. But something had opened that door, something had called my name, and something with white hair had peered into the room. Of course, Mum and Dad thought I was just making an excuse to get out of piano practice. They didn't believe me, and I had to go back and finish it. I wasn't particularly scared, but I couldn't explain what I had seen and heard. I was just frustrated that no one believed me. After that, I pushed a small coffee table up against the door the next time I practiced. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I did some work experience at a care home, and to be honest, I didn't think anything of it at first. The place seemed nice, and all the residents were really friendly. There were 3 of us doing the work experience, but the other 2 hardly ever turned up. I'll call them X and Y. We had these little booklets to fill out, a sort of record of what we'd done that day. One day, X and I were sitting at the dining table, filling out our booklets, a little apart from the residents. I had to use the bathroom, so I got up and walked across the hall to the bathroom. I was just washing my hands when I heard it, the sound of the door handle turning. It felt like someone was trying to open the door, not realizing it was locked. I called out, "Just a minute," but when I finished and opened the door, no one was there. I felt a bit uneasy as I went back to the dining room and asked X if she'd seen anyone nearby. She said no, she hadn't noticed anyone going near the bathroom, other than me. That seemed odd, especially since I had been in there alone. I thought maybe it was just a resident, perhaps one who'd moved quickly, but when I checked on them, I couldn't figure out how anyone could have gotten out of the bathroom and disappeared so fast. I asked the staff if there had ever been any reports of strange happenings, but they just shrugged it off. No, they said, nothing like that. I even checked online when I got home, but couldn't find anything to explain what happened. Was it a quick-moving resident? Or was it something else? I couldn't help but feel a little unsettled after that. Every time I went upstairs, I always had this feeling like someone was following me, even though no one was there. The care home had a screen that would light up when a resident needed something. I noticed that sometimes, the room number would buzz even when there was no one in that room. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until later that I found out about some of the strange things that had been happening in the building, though I suspect they didn't mention it to me at the time, probably to avoid scaring me off. Where I live, there's an old, abandoned bird hide. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. But by the 3rd time I passed it, curiosity got the better of me. I found myself wondering why it was even there. What animals might I see? Why had it been abandoned? The hide sits alone on the edge of a small road, far from any houses. It's an odd place, just this isolated structure standing against the backdrop of tall grass and trees. I parked my car nearby, off the road, and walked up to it. It was 2 stories high, weathered, and neglected. The door had a bolt across it. I hesitated for a moment, then slid the bolt across and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of rotten mildew, the kind of scent that comes from something forgotten. It was to be expected. I thought this place had been abandoned for who knows how long. I glanced around both floors, half expecting to find something, or someone, but it was empty. I don't know why I thought there might be something in here. Maybe a badger or a fox had made its home in the place, but no such luck. I went downstairs to look out the windows. The glass was filthy, and the grass outside had grown wild and untamed. There was nothing to see, no animals, no movement. It was quiet. Too quiet, really. I was about to leave when I heard it. A faint mumbling, almost like someone talking to themselves. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. The door had been bolted from the inside. And if someone was up there, I would have heard them coming up the creaky wooden stairs. But I hadn't. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to go up and investigate. My footsteps felt too loud as I climbed the stairs, but I couldn't stop myself. When I reached the top and peered over the railing, my stomach dropped. There, sitting on the bench by the window, was a man staring out with binoculars. He looked completely out of place. The door had been locked. I had checked it. There was no way for him to have gotten in. I stood frozen, staring at him, unsure what to do. He didn't seem to notice me at first. He just sat there, muttering to himself. Then, out of nowhere, he suddenly exclaimed, "A Hoffinch!" The shout made me jump in my skin. It was loud and sharp, echoing in the silence of the hide. Fear surged through me. I backed away from the stairs, heart pounding, my mind racing. I ran back down to the door, undid the bolt, then quickly bolted it again from the outside. I didn't know what was happening, but I had to leave. I didn't even think, I just ran to my car. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the hide from the safety of my car. 10 minutes passed, but my mind kept spinning. If the man was real, surely he would have come banging on the door by now. But if he wasn't real, if I had just imagined him, he'd vanish. I couldn't decide. Eventually, I couldn't stay in the car anymore. I was shaking, but I knew I had to go back. I stepped out and approached the hide slowly, my every step making the silence feel heavier. I undid the bolt again, each motion feeling like it was taking longer than it should. When I went back inside, it was eerily quiet. No mumbling, no sound of binoculars clicking. I went upstairs, half expecting to find him still sitting there, but there was nothing. No man. No sign of anyone at all. The hide was empty, just me. I searched the entire place, but he was gone. My heart was racing now, and I didn't wait another second. I ran back outside and, without looking back, jumped into my car. I drove off as quickly as I could, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and fear. I've lived in my home for 10 years now, with my auntie, because my parents work abroad. For the most part, it's been peaceful, nothing out of the ordinary. But recently, something has started happening that's made me feel really nervous. It all started a few days ago when I was in the bath. I heard it, footsteps from above. It was so clear, like someone walking or pacing in the loft. I thought it was my auntie at first, maybe up there for some reason, but then I realized something strange. I hadn't heard the loft ladder come down. I got out of the bath quickly, threw on some clothes, and cautiously opened the door, just a crack. The loft hatch was still closed, and the ladder wasn't down. On top of that, I could hear my auntie laughing downstairs. But the creaking continued above me. It was like someone was walking around up there, and it wasn't stopping. I rushed downstairs and told my auntie, "I think there's a man in the loft." She just laughed. That wasn't unusual for her, though she's always in a good mood and finds humor in almost everything. But I could see she realized how serious I was, and the laugh stopped. She followed me upstairs, and we went into the bathroom. The creaking was still there. She tried to explain it away, saying it was just the bathwater moving and causing the sound. I wasn't convinced. After draining the tub, though, the sound was still there, faint but distinct. It didn't stop. My auntie tried to rationalize it again, but the last thing she said really stuck with me. "Well, who do you think's up there? The bogeyman?" At that moment, it hit me. What if it was something paranormal? Later that night, when I was in bed, I heard the creaking again. I tried to ignore it at first, but the more I listened, the more it seemed impossible to explain. I got up, determined to have my auntie hear it too. I woke her, and we stood together, listening in the silence of the house. We both heard it, the same creaking, like someone walking around above us. My auntie, trying to make light of the situation, joked that even if someone was up there, they were too wimpy to actually hurt us. It didn't help much. By then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I was sitting on my bed doing my homework when it happened again. A massive thump, like something heavy had fallen from the loft. It shook the walls. I froze, staring at the loft hatch, waiting for someone to emerge, someone who had gotten trapped or was in need of help. But no one came. For a few minutes, everything was silent. Then the footsteps started again, the same slow, deliberate pacing. That's when I almost picked up the phone to call the police. But I hesitated. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way anyone could be in my loft. The ladder folds up from the bottom, so if someone had been up there, they wouldn't have been able to fold it back up without help. That's when I knew this wasn't someone in the loft. This was something else. Something paranormal. When my auntie got home, I told her what had happened. She went up to check the loft herself, looking for anything that might explain the noise. She tried to convince me that I had imagined it, that maybe it had been a dream. But I knew I wasn't dreaming. I had been wide awake, doing my math homework at the time. I remembered exactly where I was in the assignment when the thump startled me. I went up there to check, just to be sure. The loft was undisturbed. Nothing had fallen, nothing had changed. Everything was as it should be. I don't know what's going on in my loft, but I'm almost certain it's haunted. The strange noises, the pacing, the unexplained thumps. It's too much to ignore. Every time I hear the creaking, my heart races a little. I can't shake the feeling that something is up there, watching, waiting.
When I was in year 10, something happened at school that I'll never forget. It started with a casual conversation in drama class. My drama teacher, who was always so upbeat and full of energy, mentioned one day, almost offhandedly, that she had seen a ghost in the drama studio. We had this balcony in the studio, which used to be a seating area for small drama performances but had been long abandoned as storage. My teacher said she'd seen someone up there, a man dressed in Victorian clothing, sitting on one of the old seats. At first, she thought it was one of the students, probably messing around. So, she yelled at him to get down, thinking he was in trouble. But when she looked back, the man was gone. Just vanished. We all kind of laughed it off at first, assuming she was joking or maybe just imagining it. But for some reason, it stuck with me. I'd always sit with my back to the balcony after that, too scared to even glance up. My friends loved to prank me, saying they could see him up there, just waiting, and I'd get that cold, paralyzing feeling every time they'd do it. The idea of someone, or something, watching me from the shadows of that dusty balcony made my skin crawl. Over time, though, it became less of a joke. The story kind of faded into the background, something we all sort of ignored. The only reminder was a bin in the drama studio that some of the boys had drawn a face on, calling it the ghost's face whenever we'd pass it. But I never forgot that creepy feeling whenever I walked past the balcony, even though I told myself it was all in my head. Then one day, I was staying late after school in the homework club, which usually finished around 4 p.m. I decided to take the shortcut through the computer corridor, hoping to catch my favorite teacher before she left for the day. But when I got to the hallway outside the drama studio, I heard voices, faint but distinct. It was my drama teacher in my head of year, talking in the office. Naturally, I stopped, curious, but I never expected what I overheard next. "I've been hearing weird noises in the storage cupboard," my drama teacher said. "I swear, someone's been messing with the stuff up there." My head of year responded calmly, "The cameras picked up the door opening by itself." My heart sank. I froze on the spot, too scared to move but too curious to turn away. I could hear them speaking more, but the words blurred as I tried to process what they were saying. My drama teacher continued, "I heard someone rummaging around up there, but there's no one in the building. We've checked." At that moment, I felt like the air had thickened around me. I had always been uneasy about that balcony, but now hearing this, it felt like something I couldn't explain was happening right in front of me. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to walk past the office, trying not to think about the creaky old stairs leading up to the loft. As I passed the drama studio door, I turned my head away quickly, not daring to look up. The next day, in class, my drama teacher confirmed everything I'd overheard. She told us that she and her colleague had both heard noises from the loft, items moving, the sound of footsteps, even voices. 2 male voices, to be precise. They had gone up to check but found nothing. When they reviewed the footage from the security cameras, it showed the door opening on its own, nothing else. No one was there. She explained that the loft was always locked and only she and her colleague had keys. The door couldn't have been opened from the inside without someone with a key. Then, she asked us all to go up to the loft to grab some props. None of us wanted to be the first to go. We all stood huddled at the foot of the stairs, casting nervous glances at one another. Finally, one of the boys reluctantly stepped forward and placed one foot on the first step. Just then, my drama teacher's voice rang out from below, sharp and commanding. "You shouldn't be trying on the costumes, take it off." It was the kind of voice she might use if she caught us being silly or messing around. But no one moved. We all just stared, horrified. None of us dared to move or go up. Then, my teacher stepped out of the studio, pale and shaken. "I saw him," she said, her voice unsteady. "I thought it was one of you at first, but when I looked again, he was gone." That was enough. I'd never seen her so shaken before. We all stood there in stunned silence. There was no denying it anymore. Whatever we had laughed about, whatever had been brushed off as a joke, was real. And it wasn't something any of us wanted to experience firsthand. After that, we were moved to a different room for drama. It was as if the entire class, teacher included, had agreed to pretend that the studio wasn't haunted, even though we all knew better. None of us ever spoke of it again, but we all felt it. The tension, the fear, that feeling of being watched from the dark corners of the room. The ghost, it seemed, was still there. And none of us wanted to be the one to confront it.
Back in the summer of 2017, when the farm was up for auction, I never imagined what would come from that dusty old barn. It wasn't just the antiques I was after, it was something much more. Hidden behind the barn, under a tattered tarp and layers of dirt, sat an old truck. An old Bedford, 1950s model, with a van-like back. It was a dream waiting to be restored. I had always loved classic vehicles, and as a former truck driver and now a business owner restoring antiques, I figured this would be the perfect project. Not only would it fit in with our business, hauling antiques to auctions, sales, and customers, but it was a piece of history that could be brought back to life. Little did I know, the truck came with more than just a restoration challenge. After much work, and a year and 2 months of labor, we finally got the old Bedford running again. We named her Linda. A beautiful black truck with teal and silver accents, matching our business's branding. It turned heads wherever we went. She was like a new truck, handling like a dream for her age, and she quickly became an essential part of our business. But it wasn't long before strange things started happening, things that made me wonder if Linda's previous owner hadn't quite left us. The first oddity came around Christmas of 2018. I was out making a solo trip with my dog, Boss, a 10-year-old Husky/Labrador mix, who usually loved riding along. As I was loading up the truck, Boss did something that caught me off guard. He walked up to the truck, tail wagging, but when he got within 6 feet of the open door, he suddenly stopped. He just stared at the empty cab as if something, or someone, was in there. "Boss, you coming or not?" I called, waving him over. He snapped out of his trance and trotted over, no fuss. I thought nothing of it at the time, but looking back, it was the first sign that there was more to this truck than I had realized. It wasn't until January 10, 2019, on a late-night return trip from an auction, that things took a much stranger turn. I had pulled over on the A26 levee around 2 a.m., exhausted and needing rest. I stretched out on the bench seat, my pillows and quilt set up around me, trying to get some sleep before the long drive home. Suddenly, I woke to loud rattling noises from the back of the truck. I groggily sat up, thinking maybe a rat had gotten into the cargo. As I started to get up, I heard a voice, soft but clear, whisper, "Shh, don't go out there." I froze, heart racing. I was the only one in the truck. Again, the voice repeated, "Shh, don't go out there." It wasn't threatening. In fact, it felt more protective, like someone looking out for me. The spirit, whoever it was, seemed calm, almost worried for my safety. I heeded the warning, staying in the cab. A few minutes later, the rattling stopped, and I went back to sleep, feeling strangely comforted. The next morning, I went to check the back of the truck for signs of a rat, but instead found strange, unidentifiable marks on the frost-covered ground. They didn't look human, and there was no sign of any animals or damage to the truck. I later learned that the A26 is known for ghostly phenomena, Roman soldier spirits, black shuck sightings, and ghost vehicles. Something had been out there with me that night. This was just the beginning. Over the next few months, more strange events began to unfold. One night, while resting at Rockford Tyne Lane near the infamous Sally on the Hill overpass, I heard a loud crunch and the sound of shattering glass. Thinking it was a car accident, I got up to investigate but didn't hear any engines or voices. As I was about to leave my truck, a soft hand seemed to gently press me back down on the seat. I was fully awake, my phone in hand, but someone was telling me to stay put. The next morning, there was no sign of an accident, no broken glass, no damage. The event had been nothing but an eerie sound, one that didn't quite make sense. Another time, while driving through a small village in Yorkshire, I had to swerve to avoid a broken-down car in the middle of the road. Just as I was about to hit a roadside sign, I felt the steering wheel jerk violently to the side. The force was stronger than I could manage myself. There was no way I could have turned the wheel that quickly, especially with the old truck's lack of power steering. Something had taken control and saved me from a serious accident. I also had some mechanical oddities with the truck that made no sense. A busted lock that should have let the back doors swing open on bumpy roads held them shut for hours. When I stopped for lunch, I found the latch had been damaged before I even left, yet somehow, the doors stayed locked tight. I knew someone, or something, had been looking out for me. One of my friends borrowed the truck once and had a terrifying experience of his own. A blowout at high speed on the freeway sent the van into a dangerous skid. He later told me that, in that moment, the steering wheel seemed to guide itself, keeping him in control and preventing a serious wreck. He swears the same spirit that had been with me on those trips helped him too. There were other odd things, a cold night in the truck that didn't seem so cold, no matter how harsh the weather, and a lingering feeling that someone was always watching over me. Whoever or whatever it was, I wasn't about to complain. In fact, I felt grateful. The old truck had a spirit, one that seemed content with the restoration and perhaps even proud to be on the road again. It wasn't alone anymore, and neither was I. A few months ago, something happened in our house that has stuck with me, something I still think about often. My son is 6 years old and has global developmental delay. He's incredibly clever, though, and shows a few traits of autism, though he hasn't been formally diagnosed. He was 5 when this happened. I was in the kitchen one afternoon when he came downstairs, looking a bit distant, as if something was on his mind. He looked at me and said, "There's a girl in my room." He spoke so casually, like it was just another normal thing. He went on to tell me that she was playing with his toys. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept calm. I asked him if he was going to go back upstairs to play with her. He didn't answer, just gave me this strange look. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked back up the stairs. A few minutes later, he came back downstairs, and there was something different about him. His face was confused, almost startled. I asked him what was wrong, and his response was something I'll never forget. He told me, very seriously, that he had thrown a toy baby bottle at the girl, and just like that, she vanished. He was so certain, so adamant about it. The way he described it, it was like he had solved a mystery, his eyes wide with disbelief, yet certain of what he had just experienced. What made this even more strange for me is that my son doesn't really have an active imagination. He's very matter-of-fact, grounded in his reality. So for him to experience something like this, something that couldn't be explained, was nothing short of remarkable. The thing is, my son wasn't the first to see her, he was the third. But he was the first to actually interact with her. I still can't shake the thought of what he saw. I'm left wondering if this was the last encounter, or if something more will happen. As for me, I've had my own strange encounter. I was sitting on the couch one evening, facing away from the door, when I started hearing a faint knocking sound. I assumed it was my husband, just playing around, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But then I looked up, and for a split second, I saw someone, just a glimpse, quickly retreat behind the door. I couldn't help but laugh, thinking I had caught him in the act. "Got you," I said, standing up to go check. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. I froze, standing in the hallway, trying to figure out where everyone was. I could hear my husband in the bathroom, getting ready for work. That's when it hit me, it couldn't have been him. The person I had seen was too tall to be one of the kids. This was one of those moments that stays with you. The man, the one who I've only sensed a handful of times before, was playing games with me. It's strange, because while I've never had many experiences with him, this one felt different. Like he wanted me to see him. To know he was there. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few months ago, I went on holiday with my family, and let me tell you, some pretty strange things happened that I couldn't explain. After talking with my family and friends, I realized I wasn't the only one who noticed something off. We stayed in a large house near Devon. It was spacious, with enough rooms to accommodate all 8 of us: my mom, dad, my sister Skylar, my boyfriend Carlos, our cousins Casey and Oceana, and 2 friends, Edison and Macy. The house was beautiful, nothing unusual from the outside. We picked our rooms, unpacked our things, and then went off to explore the place. The house had 10 rooms, and since there were only 8 of us, 3 of them remained empty. Edison claimed one of the unused rooms for himself to practice his dancing, while the other 2 stayed untouched. That first day, nothing out of the ordinary happened. We made plans for the following days and then went to bed. I slept in the same room as Carlos, and he fell asleep quickly. But I couldn't sleep. Edison and Oceana were talking loudly next door. After a while, I got so frustrated that I wrapped myself in a blanket and went to tell them to be quiet. But when I stepped into the hallway, something strange happened. Edison and Oceana met me halfway between the rooms. They said they had heard Carlos and me talking and had come to tell us to be quiet. We were all confused. None of us had been talking. It was like we were hearing each other's voices without ever saying a word. We all went back to our rooms, puzzled, and I eventually fell asleep. The next day, after we returned from a walk, my mom was visibly shaken. She was absolutely certain she had seen someone in one of the bedroom windows. She refused to go back inside, saying she was afraid of burglars, her words, not mine. We searched the house thoroughly, but it was empty. We chalked it up to a trick of the light, a shadow that played tricks on her mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later that evening, I was in the bath, and Carlos was sitting on the floor opposite me. We were chatting when, suddenly, we heard the shower turn on in the bathroom down the hallway. The owners had specifically told us not to use that shower due to a drainage problem, warning us that we would have to pay extra if we did. Carlos went to check, thinking someone might be using it despite the warning. But when he returned, he told me that Casey had said she was just brushing her teeth when the shower turned on all by itself. We shrugged it off as faulty plumbing and settled down to watch TV. But later that night, I kept hearing thumps and bangs coming from the room Edison was using for his dance practice. I tried to ignore it, but the noise was persistent, and I was starting to get irritated. I promised myself that Edison would pay for disrupting my sleep the next day. At breakfast, Edison was furious. He was asking everyone if they had used his dance room. He swore someone had pushed him in the middle of his pirouette. But everyone had an alibi. That's when I started to think there might be something more to all this. but I didn't say anything. I knew some people in the group were skeptical about ghosts, and I didn't want to freak anyone out. The weather turned rainy, so our plans for the day were cancelled, and we decided to explore the house some more. Casey suggested we check the loft. We found a dusty Monopoly box and an old tennis set, but aside from that, it was just boxes of personal items we decided not to dig through. In the middle of our game, Edison stormed in, visibly upset, demanding to know who had pushed him during his pirouette. Everyone was accounted for either playing the game or watching TV. No one was near him. This time, my thoughts were harder to ignore. I was starting to believe something paranormal might be going on. But I didn't say anything to the group. I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. That evening, my mom was still convinced there was someone upstairs, but the house was still empty. We all heard whispers late at night, but when we checked, no one was there. The shower continued to turn on and off on its own, and Edison refused to step foot in his room again. On our last night, Carlos stayed up late finishing a painting, so I stayed up with him. I sat in front of the TV, which was turned off, sipping my tea. That's when I noticed something in the reflection. A young boy was sitting next to me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but no, there he was, clear as day. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't move. It wasn't my first ghost encounter, and I wasn't about to let fear take over. I stared at the reflection for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. Then, the boy spoke, his voice a soft whisper. "I miss my mummy and daddy." Before I could respond, he disappeared. I wanted to run, but I stayed. I didn't tell Carlos or anyone else what I'd seen until we were safely home. It was back in 2017 when I stumbled across something I couldn't quite explain. There was a farm near Milton Keynes, UK, that had come up for auction, a family estate sale. Being an antique collector and restorer, I thought it would be interesting to take a look, even if I wasn't planning to buy anything. At least I could see if they were going to auction off any unwanted furniture or farm equipment, things I could use for my antique auction house. My partner, who I'll call M, and I decided to make a weekend of it, heading down for the auction on Saturday. The idea was simple: enjoy the weekend, take a look at what was on offer, and see if anything caught our eye. Our friend, Jay, who restores old cars, was also coming to check out some vehicles they had for sale. The house itself was incredible. Beautifully restored, it stood as a testament to the care and love the family had put into it over the years. It was built from stone, with hedges neatly trimmed around the front yard, and the entire property seemed to have an elegance that matched the era it was built in. It was on 2 floors, with a basement that had been converted into a guest house. The entire place had been well kept, full of good energy, and honestly, Em and I started to think, this could be perfect. Maybe we could buy it and turn it into a B&B or a farm stay. We toured the house, both of us nodding in approval, but there was one part of the property that really caught our attention: the barn. The entire property was impressive. There was a large 4-car garage, a farm vehicle shed, a barn with stables, pens for animals, and a chicken shed. Everything was laid out beautifully, almost unnaturally so. It was as if the farm had been frozen in time, preserved perfectly, even with animals still there. We wandered around, met up with Jay and his wife Elle, and talked about the cars and machinery. We decided to check out the barn, as Jay had some interest in the space, and it seemed like an opportunity to explore. The barn was large and in good condition, despite its age, and we walked down the center aisle, admiring the layout. We left the barn door open as we walked across the arena to check out an old truck parked outside. As a former truck driver, I wanted to see if the truck was worth restoring or if it was too far gone. Jay and I joked about me, barely 5 feet tall, trying to climb into the cab with his help. We were laughing, and Em was giggling at the sight of us wobbling around. It felt light-hearted and carefree until, all of a sudden, the rear barn door slammed shut. Then, it opened again. And slammed shut again. It repeated this a few times in quick succession, until it stopped. The sudden, unexpected noise made us freeze. We looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. After a moment of silence, we quickly finished looking at the truck and made our way to the side gate, thinking we had perhaps disturbed someone, and maybe the door slamming was a result of our laughter. But as we walked near the chicken shed, something strange happened. Em and Elle stopped in their tracks, staring up at the upper windows of the barn. I didn't notice at first, but then I saw them. Both women looked at each other, their expressions frozen, before they turned to me. "Did you see that?" Em asked, her voice low. Elle nodded in agreement. They were both certain they had seen faces looking down at us from the barn windows. Faces that didn't look happy. Jay and I, still behind them, didn't quite understand. I brushed it off. It's probably just the two people who slammed the doors earlier. They might be upset we were making noise. But something about the way Em and Elle were acting made me uneasy. I told them not to worry. The auction brochure had mentioned rooms upstairs in the barn, and I figured maybe people were just waiting around for the auction to end. We went back to the auction, and the farm went for way more than we were willing to pay, but I did buy the truck and some other items for my shop. Everything seemed fine at the time. But 2 weeks later, when we returned to pick up the truck, things took a strange turn. We arrived with Jay, and another friend, R, and his brother T, to help load the truck onto a hauler. I started talking to the estate manager about the barn and the rooms upstairs. I had noticed the windows on the outside of the barn, and I mentioned that the view from up there would be beautiful. The estate manager looked at me, confused. "What rooms?" he asked. I explained, "The ones upstairs in the barn, you know, the ones listed in the auction details." He gave me a strange look before responding, "There are no rooms upstairs. The stairs collapsed about 20 years ago. There's no way anyone could get up there now. Those rooms haven't been used in decades." I was stunned. The faces we had seen in the windows weren't possible. There was no access to the upper floor, at least, not since the stairs had rotted away. The estate manager then took us over to the barn to show us the stairs. They were completely gone, reduced to rubble. There was no way anyone could have been up there. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had Em and Elle seen faces in the windows when no one could have been there? And then, when we looked up at the barn windows again, they were dusty, almost as if they hadn't been cleaned in years. The dust was thick, and I was sure they hadn't looked that dirty when we were there before. We were still processing this when Em jokingly said, "Someone should really fix those barn doors. They keep slamming open and shut." The estate manager looked at us, even more surprised. "Those doors don't close. They're rusted open. We've tried to fix them, but nothing works." At that point, I could see the estate manager was beginning to look a bit uncomfortable. Maybe he thought we were imagining things. But we all knew what we had seen. The doors slamming shut on their own. The faces in the windows. The strange feeling in the air. And even now, every time I drive the truck, I get this odd sense that the past owner might be along for the ride. Maybe they're happy the truck has been restored. I'm not sure. There's something about it, a strange energy I can't shake off. Maybe one day, I'll write about the truck's odd behavior. But for now, I'll leave it at that. Who was watching us that day from the rooms no one could access? Who or what was slamming the barn doors? Was it the spirits of the farm, upset that it had been sold out of the family? I think we may have disturbed something. And I can't help but wonder if the farm's new owners have been troubled by the same strange occurrences. All I know is, I've never been back since. Gladstone Villa has always been a place of mystery, a house that seemed to carry more than its fair share of history within its walls. The property, named after the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone, who passed away in 1898, was more than just a home for the families who lived there. It seemed to be a place where the past never truly left, where the echoes of former inhabitants lingered like whispers in the dark. The history of the villa stretches back to the early 1900s, according to a map from that era, showing the once bustling mining town of Bargod, which the villa called home. It stands still today on Cardiff Road, a monument to the time when the area was at the heart of the coal mining industry. Over the years, many families have passed through its doors, but not all of them left without leaving behind something that went beyond mere memories. The first family recorded to live at Gladstone Villa were the Jones family during the First World War. Henry Jones, a father of 14, found enough space in the grand house to shelter his entire family. Life during those years was hard, but Gladstone Villa seemed to offer a certain comfort amid the chaos of war. Henry's son, Albert, served in the conflict and was taken prisoner by the Germans, returning only in 1917. Despite the hardships, the house remained a place of refuge, its walls silently holding the weight of history. In the 1920s, the Kimmiott family took up residence. Michael and Evelyn Kimmiott moved into the villa in the early years of the decade, and in 1923, they married. Their son, Elvin Roland Kimmiott, was born in February 1924, but tragically, he died just 4 months later on the 29th of May. His funeral, held at Bedwellty Church on the 2nd of June, was a strictly private affair, as reported in the Cardiff newspaper of that year. This loss, so profound and untimely, left an indelible mark on the villa, one that perhaps lingered in the corners of the house, mourning a life that was never allowed to blossom. The 1940s saw the Williams family move in, Hugh, his wife Gwen, and their son Robert, who was born in the villa on the 8th of March, 1946. The family stayed until 1950, but the house had already begun to acquire a certain reputation. The Mills family, who lived there after the Williamses, were the ones who spoke most openly of the house's eerie qualities. Edgar Mills, in particular, would tell his son Kevin stories of the villa's strange happenings. He recalled hearing rhythmic tapping on the door at odd hours of the night, only to find no one there when they investigated. Edgar was certain that something or someone was present in the villa, and it wasn't long before the locals in Bargod started to whisper about the haunted house on Cardiff Road. Some said that the house was connected to a tunnel system that ran from Cardiff Road to other nearby villages, a manor house, and a church. The legends surrounding the tunnel seemed to weave into the fabric of the villa's haunted reputation, adding an air of intrigue and mystery that would persist long after the Mills family moved out. In 1960, my own family moved to Gladstone Villa from Francis Street. My grandparents, William and Rita Higgs, took up residence there with their 10-year-old daughter, Caroline, my mother. Life in the villa was ordinary at first, or so it seemed. Caroline went to Bargod North School, and my mother, Rita, found work at the local bakehouse. But then something started to change. I was born in August 1969, and that's when my mother says the strange occurrences began. At first, it was subtle, just the occasional tapping, like someone was knocking on a wall or a door, but nothing to raise alarm. But as time went on, the activity escalated. The tapping grew louder, more persistent, until one day, my mother swore that something jumped from the attic, landing in the room above their bed. The atmosphere in the house began to shift, as if something unseen was moving through it, occupying the space with an eerie presence. For nearly 9 years, from 1969 to the summer of 1978, my family endured strange phenomena that defied explanation. Electrical cables were pulled by unseen forces, footsteps could be heard in the main bedroom, and the occasional sighting would occur, though these were rare. On 2 distinct occasions, my mother claimed to have seen full, solid figures. One was a monk, who appeared in the hallway, his presence as cold and silent as the stone walls around him. The other was an elderly man who poked his head through the open bedroom door one afternoon, his features clear as day, yet when she turned to confront him, he was gone. There were also rumors of a crying baby in the house, a sound that echoed late at night, though I never heard it. I only learned years later that a baby, Elvin Kimmiott, had died in the villa in 1924, just months old. Could it be that his spirit lingered there, mourning the life he never got to live? In the summer of 1978, we finally moved from Gladstone Villa to Sycamore Court, a newly developed estate in Bargod. Life began to return to a sense of normalcy, but the strange events in that old house remained with me. I often wondered if the house's dark history had somehow triggered the activity after I was born, or if it was simply dormant, waiting for a new generation to inhabit the villa. In the 1980s, Gladstone Villa was converted into Reds Park Hotel, a business that lasted until 2014 when it closed. The property was eventually bought by Mr. Mills, the same man who had lived there during the 1940s and had often spoken of its haunted nature. There were rumors that the villa was to be converted into flats, but no one knew for sure. The house, it seemed, would continue to stand as a testament to the ghosts of the past, whatever they may have been. I later learned that Evelyn Kimmiott, the mother of little Elvin, had passed away in 1970, just a year after I was born. Could it be that her spirit returned to Gladstone Villa, still searching for her lost son? Some mediums who visited the villa years later claimed to have picked up the spirit of a monk and an old lady, perhaps Evelyn herself, mourning her child. I never learned the identity of the elderly man my mother saw, but it's possible it was Edgar Mills or even Henry Jones, the father of 14, who had lived there before. To this day, the mystery of Gladstone Villa lingers, as does the question of who or what haunts its walls. Is it the restless spirit of a mother who lost her child too soon? I got a call from my cousin one evening. She sounded off, asking me to come over because something was really freaking her out. When I got to her house, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick with a tension that was hard to ignore. We sat down on her sofa. She looked exhausted, pale, like she hadn't slept in days. She began explaining what had been going on. She's a keen swimmer, goes for a swim in the river every day. But this time, as she swam, she noticed some stones at the bottom. Curious, she dove down and picked them up. She knew I liked stones, so she thought she'd bring them home for me. As she said this, my heart sank. I immediately knew what stones she was talking about, the same ones I had thrown away not long ago. She said she'd kept them, hoping to give them to me at some point. But ever since bringing them back, things in her house had started changing. The atmosphere had become strange, almost oppressive. And there were knocks on the walls, sometimes from upstairs, where she didn't want to go anymore. It was affecting her sleep. I shared with her what had happened to me with those same stones. She looked terrified, almost panicked. A sudden knock on the front door made her jump, and I had to tell her to stay calm. I went to answer it. When I opened the door, a man pushed past me without saying a word and walked straight into the living room. I followed him, confused but on edge. He turned to Oceana. "I need those stones," he said, his tone flat, more of a demand than a request. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Edison," he said, glancing at me. "And you are?" "Sophie, Oceana's cousin," I replied. After a few moments of awkward introductions, he explained that he was a friend of Oceana's. He wanted the stones, needed them, he said, to protect her. To destroy them, once and for all. We discussed it for a while, and in the end, we decided the best option was to bury the stones far away from both of us. Edison had another house, one out of town, where he could take them. If anything went wrong, he'd be able to leave without putting anyone else at risk. So, that's where they are now. Buried deep in the ground, and Edison swears he'll never dig them up. We hope that's the end of it. No more stones. No more strange knocks in the night. No one else will ever have to deal with them. I'm 24 now, living up in the north of England, and looking back, I realize just how many strange experiences I've had. Growing up, our house was no stranger to unusual happenings. The first memory I have of something strange happening was when I was around 6, which would have been in 2001. Our house was detached, not connected to any other homes. And it started with the footsteps. We'd hear them upstairs, running back and forth, fast, heavy steps. They were so distinct, always the sound of someone moving quickly, like a child running. Sometimes it would happen a few times a week, other times just once a month. But I remember it scared me. I would lie in bed, too frightened to even move my head and look across the room. Only recently, my mom and I were talking about it, and she told me something I didn't know. She and my dad would often be downstairs when they heard those same footsteps. She'd come upstairs to tell my brother and me to stop running about, only to find us both sound asleep. That was a revelation for me because I could never have known, but we never ran around. Our dad was strict, and we would have been too scared to get into trouble. We always tiptoed if we sneaked into each other's rooms. It's strange to think back on those times, but we all heard the running. It became part of the background noise of our lives. The footsteps continued, even into my teenage years. By the time I was 14 or 15, it had become less frequent, more like something that would happen a few times a year. Another thing that happened often were loud thuds and bangs, especially from upstairs. Sometimes, it sounded like someone was stamping their foot, other times, it was as if something heavy had been dropped. The sounds were so loud, you could actually feel the vibrations through the floor. Again, all of us heard it, but there was never anyone up there. My bedroom was directly above the dining room, and I remember hearing thuds coming from below, like things being moved around. It would happen at strange hours, 2, 3, even 4 a.m. often. I would hear what sounded like the sliding doors from the living room to the dining room banging together in the middle of the night. My mom and brother heard it, too, but we never figured out what it was. The thuds became less frequent as I got older, but they never really stopped. When I reached my teenage years, different things started to happen. Electrical devices would turn themselves on, sometimes even switching off and on again. I remember the first time it happened with the TV, when I was about 8. At first, I was scared, but then it became almost like a game. I'd turn it off, and seconds later, it would turn back on by itself. I'd laugh and tell my mom, and then turn it off again. The same thing happened with every TV we had, all the way until we moved out in 2018. Now, being older and a bit more practical, I tried to find a logical explanation for it. An electrician came out a few times, but he could never find anything wrong. The lights would also turn on by themselves, but this happened less often. There was also a DVD player we had that would open and close on its own, even after it broke and we got a new one. The new one kept doing the same thing, opening and closing by itself, sometimes several times in a row. By this time, I was about 15, and while I wasn't scared anymore, I was definitely curious. My mom and I would laugh it off, joking that it was our friendly ghost making an appearance. There were also things that would disappear, only to turn up days or weeks later. It started when I was about 13 or 14. Items would vanish, sometimes right under our noses. At first, we thought we were just misplacing things. But after it happened so many times, we knew we weren't imagining it. One of the most frequent things that disappeared was my mom's comb. She'd place it down on a chair, but when she went back to get it, it would be gone. She'd search high and low, but it would only turn up hours, sometimes days, later. One of my items went missing for years, and I'll share that story in a separate post. There's one thing I never told anyone about until recently. It only came up when I was talking to my mom about all these experiences. I would often feel someone sit on my bed. It wasn't when I was asleep, and I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. I would feel the mattress press down, like a child had climbed onto the bed. Sometimes, I'd feel a pressure on my legs, like something was resting on them. My mom told me she experienced the same thing. We both agreed that whatever was in our house seemed to be a child. The footsteps sounded like a child's, and there were so many instances of toys turning on by themselves, no matter how many times we removed their batteries. Despite the fear that came with these occurrences, we never felt truly threatened. It was more like a mischievous presence, playing pranks. We both felt as though whatever was there just wanted to be noticed, but it wasn't malicious. When we moved in 2018, I was strangely sad to leave behind whatever had been trying to communicate with us all those years. I tried researching the land before our house was built in the 70s, but the only thing I found was that a farm had once stood there, back in the 1800s. I often wonder if something tragic happened on that farm, or if the land was somehow connected to the old mining accidents that plagued the area. The town was known for its mining history, and many lives were lost, including children who worked in the mines. It's a haunting thought, but one that I'll never be able to fully answer. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.